And Corinna, if you can keep an eye on quorum as well, I'd appreciate it.
Small talk, Anna, until we get enough people here.
Adam, your audio is really quiet. I don't know if there's something in front of your microphone.
There's not.
I know you're not a quiet speaker, so that's not the problem.
I am not. Can you hear me? Is it still really quiet?
No, it's better now.
Okay. Maybe I was speaking quietly, but I can fix that. I was just asking, do we want to make small talk? Uh, I've got a check-in question because I always do.
Sure.
Okay.
Dottie asked in the chat how everyone is doing as well.
Oh, oh, sorry. Well, Donnie, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good myself.
Right on.
Even though I'm not a member yet, I'm actually super excited to hear back about that because I really want to do a lot for other people.
Nice. I'm glad to have you. Glad to have you here as a guest for now. As we looked and worked to fill those seats. So I got
Hello,
asked.
Bree and Timmy. Glad to have you both here. I'm guessing you're using one computer for both. Got you. Thanks for noting that in the chat. Corinna, if you can make sure that that's noted as well in the attendance list.
I had someone ask me today, Anna, when was the last time you felt rested? It was kind of it made me think a little bit. I was like thinking about, I don't know, when do I feel rested? And I think I settled on I had back-to-back meetings with different groups of people, but the same facilitator, so I got asked the same question twice, and so I had time to think about it and like refine it a little bit. And I think the last time I really felt like rested was like waking up last summer in a tent after sleeping on like the hard ground, right? Like in a wilderness area on the side of a lake where it was like you woke up with the sun, right? You didn't have an alarm. You had like you're a little cold, but like it was also nice and like made a cup of instant coffee and just kind of eased into the day. And I think that like even though that's probably a terrible night's sleep, I think I was maybe the last time I felt rested.
Wow.
Hey Jenny, yeah, we're waiting for quorum. Sorry. It's not I'm not trying to cut time for public comment.
And I'm checking quorum now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
When's the last time you felt rested, Jenny?
6, 7.
It takes a little while to think about, huh? It's like, gosh, yeah, when was the last time?
Before I had kids.
I heard that a couple of times today from other folks. Yeah. And there was discussion about maybe someday there will be rest. Yes. Looks like you're not alone in the chat. Oh, Haley, I wish. I need a side hustle, but narrating, you think my voice is nice? I cannot stand the sound of my own voice. But I'll take that as a compliment. So thank you.
Total radio voice. Own it.
Wow. Okay. I don't think anyone's ever said that to me before, so thank you. Oh, Cindy, you're a Disney person. Right on. I
Just
feel
got
like,
back a couple days ago.
but isn't that like busy? Aren't you like,
But it's a fun busy and it's on my own agenda busy. So totally makes a difference.
yeah.
Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. People are bouncing around. 6, 7, 8.
Are you counting the
We're
names?
at 13, so we do have quorum.
All right, let's do it then.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Annette Magicotami, co-chair of the System of Care Advisory Council, representing those impacted by juvenile justice and family voice. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you here. We'll get into the agenda in just a moment. So I just want to welcome you all here. I'll review the objectives for today's meeting. Then we'll do a roll call and for members of the SOCAC and review our group agreements. Then we'll move into public comment before we start the meeting agenda today. So the agenda today is to hear public comment on legislative concept 346, discuss proposed amendments to the legislative concept 346, and vote on whether to approve them. And again, to hear public comment also at the end. So again, welcome everyone to the meeting. I will turn it over to Adam.
Yeah. All right, we'll do quick roll call here. So if you're here, please say present. We'll start with Allison Stark and Sonia Little Deer Evans.
Here.
Sorry, I missed it. Was
Hi
that?
there. This is Sonia. I'm here.
Okay, cool. Jackie Serrano and Sandra Santos.
Jackie's excused.
Okay. I think I saw Sandra, but I'll check here. I see Sandra's on.
Sorry, did you call my name? I thought I heard it, but I wasn't sure. I'm here.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Robin Henderson and Anderson Dubois.
This is Robin. I'm here.
Anderson's excused.
Okay. Kyle Johnson and Adam Peterson.
It's Kyle here. I'm present.
Adam's here and my camera is not working, so it'll look like I'm not on camera, but I really am.
Yeah, good to know. Glad you're here, Adam. Judge Marisa Gates and Jesus Nunez Pineda.
Judge Gates is excused. She'll be here at 5.
Hi, Jesus here.
Hey, Jesus. Kati Mosley from the Oregon Department of Education, who is a new member. So welcome, Kati. Are you here with us?
Thank you. Yes, I am here.
Emily Cooper and Dan Toma.
Emily, I'm here.
Not hearing Dan. Cindy Cecil and Ebony Clark.
Cindy's here.
Ebony's here.
Carissa Cousins and Jill Archer.
Carissa, I'm here.
Jill's here.
April Flint Gerner and Annette Magicotami. Not hearing April, seeing Lacey. Lacey, are you here for April or are you just here as well?
I'm here as well. She'll be here shortly. She's finishing up the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
And Annette, I know you're here, but go ahead.
Here.
Dana Hiddle and Andrew Grover.
Andrew's here.
Not hearing Dana. Alicia Overstreet.
I'm here.
Hi, Alicia. And last is me, Adam Rodakowski. I am present. So let's go to the next slide and talk about our shared agreements, which I think will be especially important today, though it is always important. Family and youth are welcome to participate in the meeting at any time. Members of the public who are not youth or family members can speak during the public comment period, and freely contribute to the chat. If you want, you are also welcome to send a private chat to Joylene Carter, Alicia Overstreet, or Annette Magicotami. If you have a comment you want someone to say for you, but you don't necessarily want it attributed to you. And so our group agreements: be present and participate, practice respect, try not to interrupt folks, and use names and pronouns of the folks as they introduce themselves. Avoid acronyms, and feel free to use the chat to write definitions or ask for clarification to acronyms. Varied and opposing ideas are welcome. Challenge ideas and not the people who have them. Be sure to honor those with quieter voices, lean in or lean back. Avoid problem solving for individual situations or crises, and we can definitely help you address those offline with the relevant subject matter experts. Sorry, just trying to avoid the chat here. Focus on our purpose, which is improving the system of care for Oregon for youth and families, and be mindful of power dynamics in the room. And of course, we want to be solutions oriented. We know that the system has problems, and we're here to try and propose and find solutions to better serve children and families across the state. So, just as a reminder, we also use the GARE tool to make sure that we're considering racial disproportionality in our decision making. It is the government accountability tool for racial equity. It requires us to ask the following questions every time we make a decision on policy, program, or budget. They're on our consensus slide as well to guide our discussions. Those questions are: what are the racial equity impacts of this decision? Who will benefit from or be burdened by this decision? Are there strategies to mitigate any unintended consequences? And do we need to complete the full racial equity worksheet in order to answer those questions and ensure that we are staying true to our agreement to use the GARE tool to make sure that we consider disproportionality in our decisions? So the DEI committee will be working through a GARE analysis of both system of care legislative concepts at their January and February meetings. So I just want to note that like, while we use this everywhere, there is a space that we are going to specifically be doing that. And so I just wanted to make sure that folks know that even though we're not doing that today, that is happening in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. And folks are welcome to join that. It's a public meeting as well. So we welcome you into that space too. Back to you, Annette.
All right, thank you, Adam. This is the time for public comment. Before we get to that, I just want to give some reminders. We're opening the meeting with 30 minutes of public comment. If you wish to speak to the SOCAC bill we're discussing, please raise your hand in the Zoom to get in line to speak. If possible, please make suggestions for improvement. We invite you to engage in this work and help us to make improvements to this bill. The System of Care Advisory Council has already voted to advance this bill in the 2025 session. Our task now is getting the contents of the bill to be as good as possible to improve access to residential services for youth with behavioral health needs in Oregon. If you wish, you may privately chat with Joylene Carter, Alicia Overstreet, or myself. If you have questions or comment you'd rather someone else to ask. So I see about 4 hands up so far. I just want to also say that this is a time for learning and getting to know what your feelings are about the bill. However, it's not a time to work through personal situations. It's a time really to gain some understanding about what's happening with children in our system and how we can improve it, which is why suggestions are very, very welcome. So with that, I see 4 hands raised. That's all I can see. I don't have the order of them raised, but I do. Okay, so we're going to go to Alicia, then Joe, Jamie, and then Riley. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I have had a couple of family members reach out to me, and I am going to try to read their comments on behalf of them, and I received permission from all of them to read it on their behalf. And then I have just some general feedback as well that was provided to me just throughout conversations. So parent one, or the first parent, name is Annalise, and I hope I pronounced that correct. She says that I oppose the legislation regarding child safety in residential and education programs because these rules don't protect our children. Second parent, Leah, who is a registered nurse, says I oppose the new rules because they don't protect our children. These are our most vulnerable kids, and we can't relax the rules that protect them. Parent number three, name is Sandra, I'm sorry. I am an Oregon resident living in Multnomah County with a child who attends school in the Portland School District. I would like to express my opposition to the new proposed changes by the SOCAC, the Child Seclusion and Restraint Law. These changes to the current law are clearly an attempt to make it easier to retain labor at the expense of our children's best interests and safety. There are many problematic components to this proposal, and without proper oversight, will directly lead to the endangerment of many children and their families. Please take the time to carefully reconsider this proposal and know that many community members like myself are opposed to the harm it will cause if it were to pass. Parent number four asked me to keep their name anonymous due to fear of potential retaliation. Says that perhaps creating an LC that fights for people getting what they need so they don't have the behaviors is more appropriate. It's quite unbelievable that this is a System of Care Advisory Council, that as a System of Care Advisory Council, that's the solution, more restraint. It is out of touch, it's madness and laughable. We all ought to step back and think about this. The fourth parent, his name is Randall. I'm the parent of a 7-year-old son with Down syndrome. Like many children with intellectual disabilities, his communication is limited. When he returns from school and I ask about his day, he typically responds with a single word, good. When he comes home with bruises or scratches, normal occurrences for an active child, these physical signs are often my only window into his experiences, as he cannot explain what happened. If he were to experience abuse, he might only be unable to communicate it, but may not even understand that he was harmed. This makes him and children like him completely dependent on their caregivers' integrity and professionalism. Our responsibility as a society is to create and maintain a robust system of protections for our most vulnerable citizens, particularly those who cannot advocate for themselves. While typical children can usually report when something is wrong, many children with intellectual disabilities cannot. This reality demands we maintain higher, not lower, standards of oversight and protection. I intimately understand the challenges of capacity and retention in disability care services. Our family has frequently faced these obstacles, often resolving them by paying additional out-of-pocket expenses to bridge gaps in state funding. However, proposing to reduce restrictions and liability as a solution to staffing challenges is fundamentally flawed. When other industries face similar workforce issues, the solution is typically found in improving wages and working conditions, not in reducing protective regulations. As a parent, I would rather shoulder the full burden of care myself than support any reduction in protections that could make my child more vulnerable to abuse. The thought of creating an environment where it becomes easier for my son or any child to experience physical or sexual abuse is unconscionable. The stakes are even higher for children like my son, who may never be able to communicate their trauma, leaving abuse potentially undiscovered for years, if ever. I urge you to consider alternative solutions that address staffing challenges while maintaining or strengthening our protective frameworks for this vulnerable population. And I have parent number 5, or the 5th parent, reached out. Her name is Carol. First, I would like to express my gratitude for the careful attention, time, and expertise offered in this work. I particularly appreciate the comprehensive evaluation of constraints to safety and well-being for system-involved children and youth and the unintended consequences to agencies, providers, and families of previous legislation. I agree with Emily Cooper and Alicia Overstreet that the LC is provider-driven, and with Alicia that that is not inherently wrong. The LC is in the interest of youth and families. However, the process does not appear to have been explicitly inclusive to them or of them. I highlight this because 1, it is foundational to system of care work, and 2, it will be important as discussions continue to consider the potential unintended consequences to youth and families down the line. I will highlight one issue to which I am particularly close. I see very clearly the far-reaching impact of SB 710. My recollection of the discussion during the consideration of this bill is that it was indeed a reaction to the death of a child in Michigan, but also a response to the numerous concerns raised by families and youth about the excessive use of restraints, particularly in residential treatment. I strongly support a system rooted in the tenets of just culture. This framework has the potential to minimize the us and them culture, which has been the system default. I also appreciate the broadening of crisis intervention models. I hope the discussion will continue with an emphasis on adequate training and support resources for staff. It is in the implementation of a model and it's not availability and policy which will make the difference. While a redefining of terms may be necessary, this will also make it easier to impose seclusion and restraint. My concern centers on the impact on the individual level. The necessity of restraints can be argued, but there is little disagreement regarding the emotional and psychological effects to a child who is repeatedly subject to restraint over time. That will be the unintended consequence of the solution. This is a conversation that must continue with families in the room. Restraint is not a one and done intervention. I would be interested in seeing numbers on how often restraints are imposed throughout the length of a child's stay in residential treatment. In his in a 38 month in a residential treatment facility between the ages of 8 and 11, my son was restrained close to 600 times. Within the first few months, he was sometimes restrained multiple times in a single day. Again, the necessity of restraining an aggressive youth may be argued. There's no question, however, that my child and others in this situation will forever unintentionally be impacted. I look forward to continuing collaboration as this work and these conversations unfold. And then there's just a couple of other feedback, such as it sounds like funding and more appropriate training would be more helpful in addressing the concerns of providers and equitable impacts on Black children and disabled children, especially when we're talking about Black and disabled are disproportionately subjected to restraint and seclusion. The term reasonable actions is vague and subjective and gives too much power to providers and agencies. And then limiting avenues to report abuse is not accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. I put a comment in the chat about time limits. We want to hear from everyone. Currently, I have 4 hands raised, so if you could keep your comment to about 3 minutes, that'd be appreciated. And of course, if there's more time in the end, feel free to step back up. So we'll go to Joe, Jamie, and then Riley.
Hello, everybody. This is the first time I have actually had a chance to participate in this this particular council. My name is Joe Carroll, and I'm a parent of Jeremy Tad Carroll. Tad was born with multiple developmental disabilities, including cerebral palsy, mental impairment, and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is a rare form of epilepsy. Tad was fortunate enough to live in his family home until passing away at the age of 48. So you can see that I'm not exactly the parent of a young child, but I've certainly have lived through a lifetime with my own son and participated. So I'd like to present some of my own personal thoughts regarding the legislative concept 346. This LC is extremely important, obviously, to assessing necessary care for youth with specialized behavioral health needs like that of my son. The Senate Bill 1515 from 2016 was designed to strengthen the state's safeguarding of children in foster care through the enhanced regulation and oversight of private care caring agencies. The license through, of course, the Oregon Department of Human Services, LC 346 appears to have numerous recommendations that would tend to reduce the overall success of Senate Bill 1515. The problems the LC aims to address, according to SOCAC, are reduced provider capacity, recruitment, and retention challenges, and liability-driven abuse reporting, which they claim are all due to existing child abuse reporting prevention laws. I think we should also address the possibility of a need for revamped rate models that would adequately fund the support needs, both for the housing and staffing. Reducing the number of abuse complaints does not necessarily reduce the amount of abuse that exists. I think we all understand that. The LC, I think, waters down the meaning of wrongful involuntary seclusion by permitting reasonable actions that align with an individualized needs of a child where there need not use to be such an exclusion. Let's see, I can imagine that many actions and policies followed in past systems, especially like institutionalized systems of care, like, for instance, Fairview, while caring for individuals were likely justified with these same terms of reasonable action and individualized needs. The use of incredibly vague and subjective terms will continue to result in providers arguing that seclusion is appropriate to a child's needs for individualized care. The LC mentions replacing the concept of serious bodily injury that defines abuse with the concept of severe harm. Here, in this case, severe harm implies a life-threatening or significant acute injury to a person, at least a legal definition. So that appears to be a higher standard of harm to have to prove, such that it'll potentially allow for more abuse. The LC will limit abuse investigations to employees and operators of DD residential settings and may not properly report things like sexual abuse conducted by any other individual associated with the child's care. It seems that since we should all be mandatory reporters of abuse, regardless of who may commit the abuse, then it should be a requirement to report it. To limit abuse reporting to just a centralized child abuse reporting hotline orally would potentially reduce reporting simply by limiting the channels available for abuse reporting. Additionally, if they are restricted to only the abuse hotline, this may limit reporting abuse if it limits granting immunity, for instance. So I just want to thank you for this opportunity to contribute to a legislative compact impacting such an important bill for the state of Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And we'll move to Jamie, Riley, and then Dr. Cindy Smith.
Hi, yeah, it's Jamie Vandergaan, representing Trillium Family Services, and really the voice of our staff. We have about 800 staff, about 400 of them work in higher levels of care that are impacted by some of these rules, and our community-based staff, of course, are not working under the same definitions. Also, about half of those staff are represented by SEIU as well. And I guess I'm glad I'm here to clarify that, just so you all know, on the ground, my interpretation of what I've read doesn't actually change any of the rules that we work under the specific definition of wrongful restraint. We would still be following all of the rules set forth in 710 and 1515 around wrongful restraint, and all of the pretty explicit rules around documentation and when to go hands-on. Obviously, it's only when there's serious physical, when someone's really trying to end their lives or end someone else's life, and that would remain. What this does change, and what I think our staff are advocating for, is that some of the technical issues that are laws, if you have taken your NCI, which is the training that you take, it's a multi-day training that trains you on how to verbally de-escalate and then trains you to how to manage those really challenging crisis situations when a client is trying to kill themselves or someone else. If that training is 1 day late, NCI Nonviolent Crisis Intervention Training, if that training is 1 day late, that's labeled as child abuse and your career is over. You will probably never volunteer in your children's school if you ever choose to have children someday. So that is the current situation on the ground. If your training is 1 day late, even if you've taken that training for 7 consecutive years or 1 consecutive year, whatever, that is a finding of wrongful restraint. If there's a missing document, that is also a finding of wrongful restraint. If you haven't documented an offer of water during a seclusion that needs to be offered every 5 minutes, that rule does not change. But if that was missed, then you would be, your career would be over and you would be founded for child abuse. And so I think that some of the staff that have to make those findings are having a really hard time because that doesn't feel like child abuse and neglect. That's not the standard in the hospital. That's not the standard in the adult state hospital. We work under a very different set of rules and child caring agencies that are pretty explicit and pretty comprehensive, and more so than in other sectors. And we're not asking to change that. We're just asking for it to be looked at, some of these technical violations that are currently considered abuse, if those could be handled seriously through DHS licensing, but not labeled as child abuse. And so I don't know if that does put any parents' minds at ease or no, but I am glad that I hear you. I hear you. But I did want to clarify that that element. So thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. We're going to go to, I did see Riley.
Yeah, I lowered my hand, so my hand wasn't continuously up.
Okay, all right.
Sorry
Then we'll
about
go to,
that.
oh, no problem. We'll go to Dr. Cindy Smith and then Donnie Douglas.
Oh, but did you want to speak? Hold on. Yeah, Riley, did you want to speak?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Riley.
So I would like to start off by thanking you all for the opportunity to be able to speak. My name is Riley. I'm a former foster youth as well as a foster youth advocate for going on 10 years now. Although there's many things I would like to discuss today regarding Legislative Concept 346, I'm coming here today to discuss 3 main points. I'd like to start off really quick by acknowledging I know there's a huge shortage in caseworkers and housing for kids entering the system. But with that in mind, I would like to talk about some of these ideas and how they're being presented in Legislative Concept 346 and are endangering kids in care instead of increasing their safety and housing needs. First things first, I'd like to point out that child welfare appears to have a recruitment and retention issues. Not having adequate staffing to do what needs to be done does not mean deviating from what abuse actually is. Trying to redefine what contributes to child abuse and what isn't is not the solution. Leaders bring forth this bill are seriously not in the know and perhaps have never experienced abuse in foster care. I have. Prior to Senate Bill 1515 being passed and kids starting to be sent out of state, it was stated that the only youth that would be sent out of state were kids who were rare exceptions and were children that were hard to control. This didn't last long before a large amount of kids were being shipped out of state and placed in for-profit facilities. Kids as young as 9 years old were being sent out of state just for a bed. When the bill was passed, it wasn't passed saying kids shouldn't be sent out of state. It was passed saying that they only should be sent to an out-of-state facility if that facility has met the same requirements as required by those in Oregon. Those out-of-state facilities won't take Oregon foster kids because, like before, they want to use unsafe holds, ones that were used and ended up killing the 6-year-old mentioned before, all because he threw a sandwich. This bill was created because the horrific abuse that came to light once someone finally listened to them. Abuse that was clear from the hospital visits, assaults on youth, reports of restraints, deaths on kids and families, etc. No one cared to go check on these kids or listen to them when they voiced what was happening. Who will be sent out to check on these kids if this is passed? Are the kids' reports going to be taken seriously? Are we going to go back to sending any kid out of state? Are you planning to control these outcomes? Because I assure you, you can't. The oversight and management of Oregon Department of Human Services is severely failing, and these kids are the ones who are suffering. On the topic of reducing housing standards to non-certified providers and relaxing language surrounding accountability, instead of spending millions on businesses like Dynamic Life or wasting taxpayer dollars on lawsuits that could have been avoided, the agency needs to revisit their priorities. Why can't we find more resource families or homes? According to Legislative Concept 346, Senate Bill 1515 is limiting the agency. But as a former foster youth, I can tell you that Senate Bill 1515 has served a lot of children and saved them from abuse and the trauma that comes from being placed in facilities and homes that should have never been anywhere close to a child. It is ridiculous that leaders of the state want to stoop to this level because they cannot figure out their own agency. Instead of redefining abuse, revisit your recruitment strategies and find out why your child abuse hotline cannot handle these calls coming in. Yes, we acknowledge it's a lot of work, but lowering the bar on what abuse for reporters is unacceptable. You're gambling with a child's life by moving away from a standard that demands any suspicion of abuse must be reported. This is not to be taken lightly, and I'm shocked that this language comes from one of the highest people in our offices in our state. Instead of focusing on sending kids to other states where child welfare clearly will lack focus on investigating and behavioral and mental health services catered for children in foster care, why does it always feel like child welfare goes in circles until a child dies? Please wake up. We understand that it can be challenging to get large certified facilities for housing, so why can't the state invest in smaller certified group homes in all counties within the state? This can be for children who don't necessarily need hand-on approach, but need a safe home. On August 3rd, 2024, a child who I will not name as to respect to their family and loved ones killed themselves after being placed in custody of Dynamic Life, who at their memorial service laughed and joked about the abuse they knowingly, with no remorse, inflicted on this child. A child who at the time was 14 to 15, and at the time they were in placement with Dynamic Life. And then after being removed from the horrible placement, lived out the rest of their life for the next 2 years in a hotel room where they ended their life at the age of 17. A child who is explained by many as a light in the dark, always a happy person, a jokester, someone that if you showed you could be trusted would absolutely do anything for you to protect your life. They had dreams of exiting care, taking in their brother, and becoming their brother's guardian. Dreams to help their brother become the best independent version of himself. 6 years prior to this, ODHS promised an illegal settlement to stop placing kids in long-term in hotel rooms due to recognizing the harm it has on children. But it didn't stop. Instead, Oregon spent millions of dollars housing hundreds of kids in hotels. So I will say this with my whole chest. If you can't keep this youth and thousands of other youth safe in our own state, how are you planning on keeping kids out of this state safe? If child welfare can't handle things within their own state, what makes you think they can handle things out of Oregon? The amount of money child welfare has spent through mismanagement and improper execution is absolutely jaw-dropping. Look, no one is saying that child welfare or the governor's office is not trying, but Legislative Concept 346 is clearly a business decision. At the heart of this bill rests a child who depends on an adult to be the voice who will save them. Are we extending this grace, or is Legislative Concept 346 simply business, as usual, because the agency cannot figure out their internal practices? As a former foster child, I've experienced both the other side of child abuse hotline as well as the in-state residential facilities. Child Protective Services came out to my house 7 times, and each time left knowing there was abuse, but too afraid to remove me and my siblings. And it took me nearly dying before I was removed from my abusers and placed in foster care. When I was in care, I had to do visitations, and one of the times, the person who drove me to my visitation was one of the people who came out to do one of the safety evaluations. I'll never forget when he told me that when he came out to do the evaluation, he saw me run upstairs to change my clothes from a tank top and shorts to baggy sweatpants and a sweatshirt before he was invited in, to which he found very odd because it was in the middle of summer. He then continued to tell me that when he came in and saw my middle brother frantically fixing what had already looked like straight picture frames and trying to make everything look perfect, if there was a way to find language around abuse, I wouldn't be sitting here to talk to you today. When I turned 18, I moved to my own apartment with my roommate. After almost a year of living there, I had trusted a friend to come over and he ended up sexually assaulting me. After that happened, I ended up staying with a friend for about a month until I felt safe enough to go back to my home, as my life was threatened multiple times by this individual. I was in the middle of a restraining order against my sexual abuser. When I came home to an incident happened where I went to go take a shower. When I got out, the door was open and no one was home. I called my mentor to see if she could help me to a friend's house until we figured out what was going on, and my mentor called ODHS, the 24-hour line, to see if they had someone who could help me get to a friend's house. ODHS ended up falsely claiming I was suicidal and forcing me to go to a hospital, and after a couple of days took my service dog from me, which is illegal, and then put me in a van and had a caged wall splitting the front seats from the back seats like a cop car. I was then taken to a residential facility that had kids ranging from the ages of 11 to 18 years old. The things that I experienced at that facility was so bad that no one, not my brother, my caseworker, my counselor, no one outside of the facility know what ensued. So bear with me as this is the first time I'll ever be mentioning what occurred behind those four walls. When you arrived at the facility, you were strip searched and had to do the squat and cough. They then stood you in the bathrooms as you showered and washed all your belongings. You were handed jail-like clothes and shoes to be taken to a room where you had to explain everything to them, from scars on your body to your mental and physical health. You were notified that if you stepped outside the doors, the staff couldn't come out and get you, but they had a juvenile detention center behind the building that was threatened if you acted out, that you'd be taken there and booked. If you wanted to talk to somebody on the phone, they had to be approved by the caseworker. The staff would call the person and they would ask if they're willing to talk to you. If the person said yes, then you were able to go to the phone cubby number. The phones were in a table with dividers, a chair and a phone on the wall that the staff would transfer your phone to the cubby number. You could literally pull the image out of a movie with a jail in it, and you would have pretty good image of it. This facility had a bridge right outside the building that people would hang around and wait for kids to run out and then take them from the facility to sell them to the sex trade. I watched as a girl that was no more than 80 pounds get picked up and slammed into the ground, all because she mumbled as she walked away, and then got taken in an ambulance because she wouldn't wake up. I never saw her again. You had a light shone through your window every 15 minutes to make sure you didn't commit suicide. The night shift staff wouldn't even bat an eye if a male staff member came into your room and was in there with the door closed for an extended amount of time. If you wanted to improve your status on the behavior chart, you allowed the male staff to do whatever they wanted to you. Of course, you had all the rooms locked off, and if you wanted to go to the bathroom, you had to ask permission. The kids there did not go to school. There was no teacher, so the 17-year-olds were at a 5th grade level if they were lucky. If you went on a facility gathering, you had to be strip searched and cavity searched, even if you were with the staff the whole time. But if you didn't go, you got punished in ways that I'm not willing to disclose. Those residential homes that, before this bill was passed, did what they wanted, when they wanted, and how they wanted. Then they knew no one would believe us, so they did as they pleased. I was there a week, only a week, before I, for the first time, ever became a runaway 18 years old. Loosening the language around abuse puts kids back in this situation. If you allow out-of-state facilities to take kids without following Oregon's guidelines, then these things can happen to the kids, but they will have no way out and no one to believe them.
Thank you, Riley. Your voice is really appreciated. Thank you so much. And before we wrap up here, I have, first of all, I want to thank everyone for stepping up, speaking up. You're so valued. And I'm going to go to Dr. Cindy Smith and Dr. Cindy Smith. Thank you.
Thank you. Riley, it's hard to speak after hearing your story, and it's very moving, and sorry to hear so many terrible things happen to you. I appreciate your testimony to that. I did want to speak myself in favor of legislative concept 346. I think it has the opportunity to correct maybe some of the unintended, unanticipated consequences of 710 and 1515. I wanted to speak first about transport and the problems with transport that I think have been created, that no one anticipated the degree to which that would become a problem, and just say that we're having a lot of difficulty with safely transporting children with mental health concerns from place to place when they need to go from, say, a hospital setting to a residential treatment setting, or from a residential treatment setting to a emergency room for care of a medical issue. So there are a lot of situations in which we need safe transportation options, and the rule changes made it very difficult for transport companies to be willing to operate. And so a lot of transport companies just left the business of transporting these vulnerable populations, which have led to a lot of safety problems in transport, as well as just lack of availability to get children where they need to go. I think that we all have a shared goal of safety for children in Oregon, especially our most vulnerable children, and that clarifying the definitions of child abuse can only benefit everyone. And I think there's a lack of clarity in the current definitions, that it would be very helpful to just resolve and be in agreement about. And I think that the legislative concept 346 goes a long way toward that clarification, and that will be really helpful. And I agree with Jamie. I'm also from Trillium Family Services, that just having clear child abuse definitions and not calling things that have never been abuse, actually, like missing a small procedural point, that's not beneficial to clients or to staff when our time is occupied by whether someone missed a piece of string in a pocket on a search, for instance, and then that becomes an issue over which maybe they are never able to work with children again, even though they were a wonderful staff member for a long period of time. So I think this legislative concept corrects some of those inconsistencies and unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your comment. Thank you, everyone, during this period for public comment. Right now, we're going to move into a discussion on the legislative concept. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Anna Williams.
Thanks, Annette. Can you all see the document? It's also available on our website under this meeting, as well as it was emailed out to council members earlier today. This is just a plain language writing out of what each section of the bill does. There's been a lot of confusion and misinformation perhaps about what the bill does, and the fact that it, people are worried it waters down the definition of child abuse. So what I did was go through and just read the legislation itself, and then show what it is that we have decided to change, and what decision points we have available in front of us. So Section 1 relates to the use of restraint and involuntary seclusion and care. We're hoping to create some whereas clauses tomorrow at the SOCAC Legislative Committee meeting at 8:30 in the morning. So if that's something you're interested in, come to that space. And Joylene has just put a link to the same plain language version in the chat. If you don't have access to it another way, please feel free to pull it up. So the new change, and this has been already approved by the SOCAC, so it's not a discussion point for today, but it defines chemical restraint in alignment with the federal definition. The specific language that is used in that is also available on our website under the LC 346. I think it says red line for amendments. It maintains all of the other definitions: child caring agency, corporal punishment. It clarifies that involuntary seclusion is child abuse unless it's something like an age-appropriate timeout in a foster care setting. It clarifies that wrongful restraint is child abuse, chemical restraint is child abuse. Anytime excessive or reckless force is used during a restraint, that's child abuse. And clarifies that individuals providing services for children may not use corporal punishment on children. It amends the definition of wrongful restraint to remove the requirement that the restraint is child abuse if it's likely to result in severe harm, and replaces it with the lower threshold of serious physical injury. So that actually is a stricter definition than the one that we are operating under currently, as opposed to some of the commentary we heard earlier that says we're watering it down. We're actually sort of shoring it up. So I think that's important to be aware of. It changes the wording on the definition of wrongful seclusion and just adds this red section here that clarifies that wrongful seclusion is child abuse under the statute ORS 419B.005. This bill actually would create that definition of abuse. So if you look right now at ORS 419B.005, that it's not there, right? But if this bill passes, it would be there. So you'll see references to that statute, and it's actually referring to the changes that this bill would be making in that statute. Section 2 defines, I forgot to put a title on this one, I apologize, defines public education program. The changes made in that section, again, we discussed in the December 3rd meeting. It just takes the same definition for restraint that exists in section 1 and applies that definition to public education programs. They currently have a different definition, so just clarity, same definition across different settings. It again changes the definition of involuntary seclusion in schools to be the same definition that we put in section 1. Clarifies the definition of serious physical harm is the one that we'll get to down the road, but that we, if the bill passes, would see in ORS 419B.005. All of these amendments were discussed and approved on December 3rd. Section 3 goes into restraint and involuntary seclusion in schools. All of this existing language remains the same. It bans chemical, mechanical, prone, and supine restraints in any public education program, bans the use of a solid object during the process of a hold or to impede a student's movement, bans any restraint that places pressure on a student's neck, throat, or mouth, unless you have to remove someone else's body part from a bite. You're able to put pressure on someone's mouth at that time. Bans any restraint that impedes breathing or applies pressure or contact with neck, throat, genitals, or intimate body parts. Bans any restraint that puts pressure on a student's stomach or back by knee, foot, or elbow, and bans any act done to intentionally inflict pain on a student. What would be new in that section would be that it adds any restraint as described in section 1 is prohibited as well in public education programs, again, for clarity and consistency, and aligns the definition of chemical restraint in schools with the definition from section 1 that we've already discussed. And then it maintains the same language around the definition of mechanical, prone, and supine restraints. It occurs after those changes. So I just wanted you to be able to look at this and look at the bill and kind of read them top down and make sure that it's consistent. Section 4, this is new language, would amend ORS 339.291 to say that people working for public education institutions, schools, may use physical intervention to break up a fight or prevent an assault if the intervention uses the least amount of physical force and contact possible, and it is not on the list of prohibited restraints listed in the bill. It bans restraints for the purpose of discipline, punishment, retaliation, convenience, or by any employee, contractor, or volunteer. That's existing language. And then new language clarifies that restraints may only be used if a student's behavior poses a reasonable risk of serious physical harm to the student or others, including animals, and less restrictive interventions would not reduce that risk. Clarifies that involuntary seclusion may only be used in public education programs if the student's behavior prevents a reasonable risk of serious physical harm to the student or others, and the seclusion does not meet the definitions of wrongful seclusion in section 1 as defined. It maintains additional language about involuntary seclusion. One question I have for the council to discuss is that the timeline in schools is longer. Currently, students can be held for 30 minutes in a restraint before they have to be certified or recertified or offered an opportunity to use the bathroom. All other institutional settings, that's 10 minutes. And so since we're striving for consistency, we hadn't discussed whether we wanted to do consistency with the 10 minutes across the board as well. So I wanted to pose that question. I see Robin Henderson has a hand up.
Yeah, I didn't catch this. My apologies for not catching this earlier, and thanks for pulling it out as a question. I would support aligning this with other settings. I don't see a reason that a less clinical setting would be allowed a longer timeline than a more clinically supported setting. So I would definitely support a shorter time setting, and would advocate for 10. Thank you.
All right, Robin. Sandra Santos asks, was there a reason why it was made 30 versus the 10? I do not know. I don't know. Michelle, were you around during that legislative conversation and can speak to that answer?
I was not. I just know that it predates the same the legislation that was mirrored for child caring agencies and IDD programs. So the more recent legislation that's been passed by the legislature has a lower time limit than what previously existed for schools.
Okay, so I see a lot of comments in the chat that folks are agreeing that that 10 minutes makes more sense than 30 minutes. Let's see. I'm gonna write that down. Yes, Saphira, I can't wrap my head around 30 minutes seems incredibly long, right? Okay, so I'm going to write that down and we'll come back to that as take an official vote on it. Obviously, it feels like the sort of general vibe is 10 minutes in schools and consistent with everything else, but we'll make it, we'll have an actual vote on that after we walk through this. Existing language says the public education institution must immediately notify parents or guardians, either verbally or electronically, that a restraint or involuntary seclusion happened, and that the hold must be recertified only every 15 minutes. Again, if we were being consistent, and this is something that we'll talk about or that we'll vote on, it would be 10 minutes and then a 5-minute recertification, 5-minute offer to use the bathroom or get some water, rather than 30 and 15.
I don't mean to interrupt your flow, Anna. So sorry.
Interrupt it away.
Check in. Are we going to break and then say, are there questions on these sections, or are we running through the whole thing and then coming back?
So these are things that we've already decided on. I'm just going through what the bill says and what it doesn't say, because there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what it says and what it doesn't say. And I think it's important that people really understand what it is. If you want me to just skip to the decision points, I can do that.
No, I don't want you to skip. I just want to make sure, because there is a lot. I feel like a lot of confusion about what is or isn't occurring in this bill, and so I just wanted to make sure that.
And if anybody, council members, if you have questions, raise your hands or whatever. As I'm talking, I don't want to stifle discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, folks felt like they could clarify or participate or whatever.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, that I don't just do a wall of words. Thanks, Adam. Allison.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo that, because I think a lot of, we heard in the public comment is kind of in opposition to kind of what we're hearing now. And so as the reality of what the language is in the bill, unless there's some sort of unintended consequences. And I think that's one of the things that I'm really interested in, is because the language as it's been explained seems relatively straightforward, at least thus far, and from what I understand in the past. But it feels like there's maybe a feeling that it is uh, loosening things. And so I guess my question would be, and I think something I'm really interested in as a SOCAC member is understanding, is this in the implementation that these concerns are coming out, or a misuse of revised language? Like, what is the mechanism how are we getting from this language to some of the things that we're hearing about in public comment? Because obviously it's really concerning. And so as, a SOCAC member, I'm starting to think, well, how can I look, I look at this language and I see one thing, but now I'm hearing that there's these other things. So how do I understand this legislative concept?
Emily?
So I think for me, part of what I look at, and I know this is very specific, but when I look at the provision around allowing the department to send children out of state, because there's not a suitable placement in state, for me, that's lessening something. And I think similar to what Riley was talking about, I mean, part of what we learned is that other states have all sorts of rules. So for example, in Idaho, they have locked residential places that are just licensed as daycare providers. So the licensing is just fundamentally different from Oregon. And so for me, what I worry about, and I'm on page, gosh, it's long, 22 of 144 or 114. The department may place a child in out-of-state placement without requiring licensing or contract requirements of the standards here in Oregon. That's where I get worried that the protections that were put in place we're now undoing. And it's because there's no placements in our state that are suitable. To me, the solution isn't let's send kids out of state where the standards are different. Let's create placements that are suitable here in Oregon that meet our licensing requirements. So for me, that is one clear, concrete example of my worry with this concept.
And can I, Emily, just ask that can we talk about that when we get there versus jumping around? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to.
It's my fault. I opened the door because I wanted to understand what were the parts. So I will also wait, and I will say for what we've gone through, I would be curious if there is something in those first sections that people are like, this is a non-starter for me. I can't agree with this language. This is very upsetting because it seems pretty straightforward.
Agreed. Yeah. And that is why I wanted to stop and just see, right, and make sure that folks felt like they had a moment before we get too deep into.
I mean, so to that one, in section 1A, chemical restraint, I think the added language of, and it's not standard treatment for the child's medical or psychiatric condition, there's all sorts of medication that is standard that can still be used for chemical restraint. And so for me, I would want this to closely mirror the federal definition of chemical restraint. And in particular, the thing that I really like that is in it is that was then stricken is that we need to have still that licensed physician. It can't just be any doctor's order means you can chemically restrain. But I think understanding, and this is where as a lawyer, I'm not a clinician, but I give a lot of deference to doctors. And so if a clinician says, hey, this is something you can give, I don't know the medication, but something that makes a kid it's sleepy at night. And this is standard for kids with psychiatric conditions, but we also know it's going to chemically restrain the kid. What are the least restrictive options and have them been documented in the chart? That's something that you often see in terms of the how this plays out. I'll pull it up, Adam.
Yeah, because I think we
That'd
changed.
take me forever.
Yeah, I think it has. Yeah, and so chemically, I see in the chat, Jamie, yeah, chemical restraint hasn't been used in child caring agencies for some time. I think longer than I've been in this work, which is around 15 years. And I believe that we did word for word align with the federal definition for
Correct.
chemical restraint in this. So that is exactly we did exactly that.
Alicia?
Yeah, I think I guess to answer Allison's question, one of the things, and especially if we're looking at, for example, the timeline in terms of when to give students or individuals a break to use the restroom, for example, when they're in the midst of a restraint, right? I think from a family member perspective, particularly someone or family members, the ones that I've been talking to and engaging with, who value or utilize the CPS model, so collaborative problem solving model, over other more reactive models to quote unquote behaviors. The idea, it doesn't necessarily make any sense, or it doesn't compute really well to have a child or a minor under the age of 18 in a restraint and then be like, oh, 10 minutes are up now. We got to give them an option to go use the restroom. And if they say yes, then they have to go to the restroom. And then when they come back out, we'll put them back in the restraint. It's that kind of like, it doesn't make any sense to us how in one area we're trying to be humane and say we're going to give them the option to utilize the restroom, but on the other hand we have to restrain them because they're so dangerous in this moment that we just can't control them, or they're not behaving in a way that we would like them to behave, and therefore it meets whatever definition we're using for restraint or appropriate restraint, but then still having to give a bathroom break. And then what do we do after that? Like once they come back out of the restroom, do we just put them back in the restraint? So I think that is probably the way. I think it's a different perspective, the way that families, especially family members who have experienced some trauma when it comes to particularly restraint and seclusion, the way that we look at it versus the way that potentially the providers might look at it. So I hope that's helpful.
It is. Thank you.
Jesus?
Yeah, so there's just a couple of points I wanted to touch on. When it comes to like chemical restraints being used only when appropriate for the person's condition, or I forgot the exact phrasing, but basically that it has to be written, and it has to be something that is already prescribed to that person that could be considered a chemical restraint if it wasn't prescribed already to be used as it stands now. Also, for folks who don't know me, hi, I'm Jesus. I'm a youth on the council, the chair of the youth committee, and a person with a plethora of lived experience in the mental health systems specifically. So yeah, currently we cannot give any medication that could be considered a chemical restraint, that's like including Benadryl because it causes drowsiness, without it being specifically written into the list of medications that person is prescribed. Which from my understanding of this bill, that does not change. And it is aligning more word for word with the federal definition. And beyond that, when it comes to holds or any kind of physical interventions done, if there is a moment in which the physical intervention is paused, or there is a break done for whatever reason, either bathroom break is offered and it's agreed upon, they go to the bathroom, they have to be at the same level of risk for a hold to be re-implemented. If the risk is considered no longer relevant, which it has to be a risk that warrants the hold to begin with. If it's no longer at the same risk level, a hold cannot be re-implemented. That would be child abuse, unless it is at the same risk level, which shouldn't be if the hold was let go. So I hope that helps clarify some stuff.
I think it does clarify, but I think the question of if the provider or person who is executing the restraint, if that person makes a determination that it is not safe to undo the restraint or release the restraint, then how do you determine that the youth is supposed to be allowed to receive the restroom break? Does that make sense? I think it's that catch-22 kind of thought process that's, I think, getting a lot of parents that I've been talking to, because to them it's like, well, if you have my child in a restraint because the child is imminently dangerous, then why are you saying that now? Well, he, she, or they are not dangerous enough to not be giving, or they're not dangerous enough to not be given a bathroom break or restroom break, if that makes sense. It's like, what's the point of the restraint in the first place if you're able to give a youth a restroom break after 10 minutes? Like, couldn't those 10 minutes initially already have been filled with like other, like things like collaborative problem solving rather than a restraint? I think that's what a lot of parents are getting frustrated with, and that's where I was trying to answer Allison's question and how parents might be listening or reading this, versus the rest of us on the council here.
But I hear you, and I don't want to like step on what you're saying. I think just ideally, right, and obviously everything's ideally because nothing's perfect. Ideally, folks are spending the time trying to problem solve before a restraint is done. Obviously, historically, that hasn't been the case, or else we wouldn't be here right now. Because to never underestimate humanity's propensity for doing harm. But ideally, they've exhausted all avenues before a restraint is implemented, except for in the condition that, like, there's a kid trying to jump out a window. Obviously, you might have to immediately interact. But the need for a restraint is to curb the immediate danger. The hope is that after those 10 minutes, when you offer the bathroom break, the threat has subsided a bit. If it is a thing where actively, if you want to add to my language, feel free. If it is a thing where it's actively still a risk, then additional calls need to be made. Additional documentation needs to be reported for that. There are, I believe, right now 3 physical intervention models that are considered like licensed in the state of Oregon. All of which the main thing is threat assessment. So in the case where a hold is being done, the person should be certified in either of those 3, or else it's considered child abuse if they're not. Obviously, people are still going to be people. Some people are just going to do things they shouldn't be doing. But with these definitions as they are, we hope to at least curb the immediate harm. At least that's how I see it. I mean, I'm not perfect either.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesus. Yeah, I do want to just give an opportunity. I see, Michelle, you have your hand up. You are a subject matter expert, so as one of the co-chairs, I'll give you a couple minutes if you got
I just wanted to clarify the whole piece around the bathroom and water break is from Senate Bill 710 and is completely unchanged. I think the only thing that we're talking about changing is the the time in schools in which that must be offered. Am I understanding that right? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And yes, that is required. And if the child wants to use the restroom, they are obligated, the staff are obligated to allow that to happen. And yes. Okay. Any
Okay.
other? Yep. Okay.
Sorry, any other questions or comments on this? Okay. Let's see. We already did the 30 minutes. The next section is also about restraint and involuntary seclusion in schools. This is related to the school district's responsibilities. No changes to the definition of behavior intervention plan, 504 plan, or individual education program, often referred to as an IEP. There's new language that would change statute to make the same definitions for wrongful restraint and wrongful seclusion again exist in the school statutes. They're currently different, and so there would be consistency there. There's new language that says that DHS would investigate wrongful restraint and wrongful seclusion in school settings and could issue a finding of abuse against a school district rather than the school employee. If the employee under investigation was not properly trained by their district, the restraint was used in response to an imminent risk of serious physical harm to the student or others, including animals. The person imposing the wrongful restraint did not act with reckless disregard for student safety, and the restraint did not pose any serious risk of impeding the student's breathing. So it would basically be the school district put a staff that wasn't appropriate into the building. That then would be a finding against the school rather than against the employee who was placed in a classroom that they should not have been in the first place. Emily?
So in the section right above that, section 4, restraint may be used by personnel. Does that include school resource officers?
Michelle?
Yeah, I think that's something I saw your comment in the chat. I was going to look at that to see. I don't know if they're technically contracted by the school district or not. So it would be contractors, employees, volunteers, but I don't know how that dynamic works in school districts.
It's different in each, it's different. Some Portland Public Schools, yeah, they paid for those positions, so it was easy for them to cut them because that helped their budget. But I mean, like other county, Washington County, for example, it's not.
So it would depend on the payment arrangement between the school resource officer and the school. If they were an employee, contractor, or volunteer, yes. If they were something else, potentially no.
So I would just have real concern if it includes school resource officers. It's law enforcement. Yeah, so that I would just flag that concern.
Okay, all
The
right.
ACLU's done a couple of really great reports on really bad outcomes when kids are secluded by school resource officers. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the chat.
So Emily, I'm not sure I understand your concern, and I want to. What I just heard you say was that you think school resource officers should be exempt from this, but that makes me think that they would be more likely to be able to engage in holds, and that's
I don't think they should be
based on
able
my
to hold
understanding.
children. I don't think so. Right now, the way that section 4 is written is restraint may be used by personnel. And if personnel includes school resource officers, I'm concerned about that.
Got it. I took a note of that. Yeah, and that Chris Barnes said in some places the school resource officer is part of the city police department. Yeah. And so then that's when they would maybe not be. If they are not contracted employees of a school district, they would fall under all the laws and statutes that govern law enforcement personnel. Yeah.
Emily, is that due to the potential of excessive force?
Yes.
Is that why you're concerned? Okay, even though they'd clearly be trained because they're officers, it's just the likelihood of excessive force.
I think excessive force and in particular prone. A couple of kids have died because officers frequently put people down on their bellies and then the knees on the back.
Okay, gotcha.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? So are SROs held to the district rules that we have here, or are they held to law enforcement rules? Because I mean, they should be following the school rules if they're in a school. I mean, I know for me, I grew up terrified of cops. I would never want a cop to touch me at school. Even in high school, I was afraid of our SRO because I didn't know what he was going to do. So I think that could be terrifying for somebody, honestly.
I don't know that this LC addresses that issue. This is personnel, right? So they would need to have some sort of official relationship with the school district itself. I think we can dig in to see what the impact on SROs would be. But at this point, what I'm going to lean towards is that this really affects, this doesn't change anything about SROs unless those folks are employees of the school district, in which case they would be under this regulation, right, as a personnel of a school district. If they are paid by the police department and their police department says, we're paying you to go be a school resource officer, that is a question I can't answer at this point, and I don't want to answer inaccurately about how the regulation would apply to them. But it would either not change it or include, not change from current state or include them under this rule, right? There's no way that it would relax or change or make more permissive their opportunity for physical engagement with the youth. So back to section 5, there's a question here. Do we want ODE to investigate violations of prohibited restraint and seclusion in school settings when it is not an allegation of child abuse? Currently, and this was a concern that some of our family folks brought to us, when there is a restraint or seclusion in school and it is ruled that it wasn't child abuse, but it could maybe some other violation of statute, districts investigate themselves. That doesn't feel great for a lot of parents, especially parents of kids with IDD. And so we reached out to the Oregon Department of Education. They have a very small investigatory division that investigates sexual misconduct of teachers that is not child abuse. Hard for me to understand what that would be, but the one example that made sense was like a teacher who was in communication with a student via Snapchat. So far nothing had happened, but it was a clear boundary violation. So the ODE investigated that as part of their sexual misconduct wing. They are open to the idea of expanding that and having ODE be the one that investigates the school district rather than the district be the one that investigates the school district. If we wanted to do that, it would add a cost to our bill. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we want kids to be safe at school, and so there's that. Even if it isn't considered child abuse, restraint and seclusion is not effective in a learning environment. It isn't going to help a child be ready to learn, and so I would want there to be someone looking at that, and yeah, probably not at the district level. I would say whether that's teaching standards and practices or ODE or whatever the case may be, I would think that makes sense.
Okay. So that's again going to be something that we want to vote on. I'm not sure, should we, I don't know, chairs, I don't know. I don't want to end up building up too many things that we need to vote on at the end. Do we want to just like take a pause and vote on the 2 school related things that we've discussed as decision points?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay.
While it's fresh in our minds.
Okay. Let me get to our voting slide. Okay, so on the question of, do we wish to move from 30 minutes with a 15-minute recertification in schools to 10 minutes with a 5-minute recertification like in every other setting in the bill? If you are a governor appointed member, does anyone want to discuss or share concerns or, well, first, does anyone want to block the vote and say, no, we're not going to vote on that? Please raise your hand or speak up or communicate directly with a chair, Annette or Adam, if you wish to block. Lisa, we're not sure how the 10 minutes got decided. That happened well before Senate Bill 1515 or Senate Bill 710 existed. Okay, so I'm not hearing anyone with comments that they want to make or discussion at this, or I'm sorry, no blocks, right? Is that accurate? Last chance to block. Okay. Is there anyone who wishes to stand aside from this vote? Okay. Is there anyone who agrees with reservations to moving from 10 minutes or 30 minutes to 10 minutes in the school space?
I agree with reservations.
Would you like to speak to those reservations?
I think, yeah, the reservation is, I know we're talking about child caring agencies and schools, but in residential settings, depending on the type of restraint, it's continuous line of sight. And as soon as the person is calm, the restraint is released. And so that would be more clinically sound, I think, youth-focused language than 10 minutes.
Thanks, Emily. Anyone else want to speak to reservations who is a governor-appointed member of this council? Okay, now is the chance for governor-appointed members to raise your little Zoom hand. If you agree, please leave it raised so that we can document. We do now need to document who voted in support of each bill as a governor, or of each decision as part of our public records requirement. All right. Miranda, you are not a governor-appointed member of this council. We have Adam Rudakowski votes yes. Allison Stark votes yes. Andrew Grover votes yes. Alicia Overstreet votes yes. Jesus Nunez Pineda votes yes. April Flint Gerner votes yes. Kachi Mosley votes yes. Dana Hiddle votes yes. Sandra Santos votes yes. Cindy Cecil votes yes. Adam Peterson votes yes. Jill Archer votes yes. Robin Henderson votes yes. Kyle Johnson votes yes. Annette Magicotami votes yes. Ebony Clark votes yes. Did I miss anyone who had a hand up? Okay, then we will make an amendment request to change from 10 to 10, from 30 to 10 and 15 to 5, so that it's consistent across all settings. What constitutes the length of a hold before recertification? For the other question we have, do we want Oregon Department of Education to investigate districts for the times when something is not ruled child abuse by DHS, but still needs some sort of investigation or response? Jesus, do you have your hand up for a question or comment? No, okay. And Ebony, same, okay. So now the question before us is, do we want Oregon Department of Education to investigate districts when something happens that is not ruled child abuse, but does require some sort of response that will add a fiscal to our bill, meaning it will cost money? Was there anyone who wishes to block this vote? Is there anyone who wishes to stand aside on this vote?
I'm sorry, Anna. Hi, Anna. This is Kati. I'm going to stand aside on this one.
That makes sense. As the Oregon Department of Education representative, avoiding conflict of interest feels fair. Andrew Grover?
What exactly is the vote? That I heard you saying, do we want school districts to investigate potential abuse that isn't ruled? Can you just state it again?
Yeah, so there are violations of prohibited restraint and involuntary seclusions that don't rise to the level of child abuse currently, right? Those are those sort of administrative, like the hold wasn't recertified, or the person's training had lapsed, or an untrained person was the only human in the classroom and something violent happened. Those would be times when an investigation of child abuse may be opened and dismissed because it wasn't necessarily doesn't rise to that child abuse level, but there should still be some response. Currently, those are reverted to the district to investigate, and then the district is investigating themselves. So if we wanted to say we want ODE to investigate the districts for those things, that is the decision that we're making now. Do we want to stick with current practice which is districts investigate themselves? Or do we want to say Oregon Department of Education should be investigating those districts when that happens?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Emily?
I honestly don't know. I mean, the question that I don't want to hold things up, but when I think about a just culture, what I've seen, so we get these reports, and when I see schools investigating themselves, there's a level of like plan of correction, talking with the staff. My only concern with ODE as one, I'm not sure about their capacity, honestly, to investigate. I mean, whoever from ODE is here, I think it would be great to hear your thoughts on it. I think in theory, I like it being neutral, as long as it's that whole culture of y'all didn't do this X, Y, and Z. It wasn't lent in a pocket and suddenly ODE is going to seize up funds. And so I don't know enough, I feel like, to make a vote either way. So if it needs to proceed, I'll just stand aside.
Well, I think Emily has a point. Also, Jill in the chat just asked, is this the only thing that adds money? I don't think we know the answer to that yet, Jill. This would definitely add money, but I think there may be some other things that would add a fiscal to it as well. So that may be something, I guess, from my perspective that, yeah, I don't know if I would be ready to vote yes or no, because I wouldn't want this chunk that with a fiscal hung on it to sink the entirety of the bill.
Well, and I just want to raise Robin's question about whether or not it's Otis. I think that's a good question.
So the first round of investigation would be Otis as under current practice, where if it's potential child abuse, Otis is who investigates that across the board. That would not change. It would be once Otis had found out, okay, this isn't abuse, there's something else, that then currently that investigation reverts to the school district. This would send it to ODE, and they would expand the department that they currently have to investigate sexual misconduct, and that department would also investigate wrongful restraint and involuntary seclusion that does not qualify as child abuse and where child abuse has been ruled out, but there still needs to be some response. So that's why it doesn't really make sense to have Otis do it, because Otis has already done their job and said, okay, well, our job, we did not find abuse happened, but we feel like there's something yucky here that you guys need to deal with. Alicia.
I would strongly encourage us to say yes to this because I want to elevate voices of family reps in the chat, one of whom said the district should not be investigating themselves. And then, yes, parents have experience with the district or districts investigating themselves and always finding they're not liable. Special education is notorious for this. Another parent says, my son was retaliated against by a SPED admin. She investigated a claim and determined she didn't do anything wrong. We got an attorney, and then that's basically when this person was then removed because she had, in fact, retaliated. Personal experience myself, I reported someone and was basically told by the district that, nothing we can do about it. Sorry, they didn't do anything wrong. And we move on. So yes, I would strongly encourage us to say yes to this, that ODE should investigate school districts rather than the school districts investigating themselves.
Thanks, Alicia. I saw in the chat some folks brought up whether Fact Oregon could be a good entity to investigate. The challenge with that is that they're not a government entity, and so nothing they do is subject to public records request or review in the same way that ODEs would be. And so, if you had a concern or question about was that investigation completed following all the rules, you wouldn't be able to do a public records request and access that information. Adam?
Yeah, I guess I'm just sitting here feeling like there are a ton of questions about this, and so maybe we're not in a position to feel confident about a vote on this question. I guess from my perspective, I see the options as figuring out what a fiscal would be. One, if we were to ask ODE to do that. Option two would be to remain the process as is, where the districts are investigating themselves when it's not child abuse. And the third would be to look at, and in the future, removing some of this language if we needed to out of the bill. So I guess those are the options I see it, and I don't feel confident in making a decision on any one of the three right now. So I would vote that we hold off on the decision on this one today.
So Michelle's asking, thanks for being here, Jill. It feels like a lot of folks are wanting to hold on this. Michelle's question is, does it make sense to have it drafted with ODE in it? That's how we get the information about how much it costs for ODE to do it. Otherwise, there isn't like a process for ODE to run a fiscal analysis on it. And then when we look at it and we do some of this investigation that we want to do, if we decide, oh, we don't like that, it's easier to pull something out. Than to sort of get it back in the flow later on and get the fiscal analysis and all of that done. So that's the other side of the we're not confident. It's easier to undo that actually than to do it later.
Okay.
Not to pressure you.
No, I appreciate the clarification. Then I guess best case to me would be for it to be in, and then we may have to remove it later.
Allison?
I have to agree with Adam. I just don't know enough about, and I think Jamie put something in the chat that I think is really important. I don't know enough about the internal operations of how, if something doesn't rise to the, to abuse and neglect, but it still needs to be addressed, how does that work? And how do all the different kind of components, engage with one another? Because I don't know what kind of relationship ODE has with every single district and how you would actually operationalize that. So I just don't feel competent to address it. And it makes me feel like having more representation from the ODE side before making any sort of changes would seem really important.
Okay. Sandra?
Oh, I just had this scenario feels like something that we encounter at times at the Oregon Youth Authority. And my question was, we have, there are things that rise to the level of child abuse and get referred. And then we have our own internal investigators that take a look at things. And because a lot of the stuff, if indeed there is not child abuse found, then it moves to like a personnel issue, a training, coaching, it moves to something different. And the quicker, the better that happens, because then you have staff off the floor, and it makes it challenging. So I don't know if school districts have their own internal investigators that do that kind of work, but if child abuse was not found, it's been investigated, then it's a personnel issue. And that's an internal issue, I guess I get worried about having things that take a long time. And, meanwhile, the staff are on administrative leave or, not able to be on the floor when it may have been just a training issue or coaching, something like that. So.
Sorry, Annette.
A question about, because the DEI is going to be reviewing this maybe Friday or in February. How will these updates or changes we're suggesting here, how is that going to impact what we're doing in the DEI committee regarding this concept?
So I think, Annette, when we had talked about sort of the schedule and timing on DEI doing this, we were like, do we do it before? Do we do it during? Do we do it after? Right. So what I was thinking and what I thought you and I decided, but if I'm wrong, tell everyone, was that we wanted to make sure we knew what the basic concepts of the bill were going to be, like pretty much what the language was. Because if it's ODE's investigating or ODE's not investigating, for instance, there might be different equity considerations that we want to make. And so after today's meeting, putting it through an initial draft and actually talking to Cody to see if he can gather all of the data that you'll need to answer the questions in the GARE analysis was like, Okay, next steps, right? We're gonna start that beginning initial conversation probably on Friday at DEI to say, okay, here's what this concept is. What are your questions? What are your worries? What data should we go gather? So that when we come back and dig in on the analysis, we've got that prep work done that Cody can actually go generate the data that you need or find what he can find.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Alicia?
I'm going to pop something in the chat, and it's actually something that ODE released, and it's the guidance for preventing restraint and seclusion in Oregon's public education programs. So there is some stuff that ODE is already doing and looking at. So it's not necessarily that, this is just, quote unquote, just a personnel issue. And I also would like to point out that there are two populations that are particularly impacted by restraint and seclusion, particularly in the education system, and that is Black children and children with IDD and other disabilities. So I would like for us, if we are going to all just kind of hold off on this, I want everybody to understand the implications of not having an extra or outside person outside from the district themselves looking at potential allegations of wrongful restraint and seclusion being used on children, particularly children who are the most vulnerable in our school system. So I'm going to pop that in the chat, and hopefully we can review it and look at it and then have a discussion moving forward, even if we don't vote on this particular thing today.
Thanks, Alicia. That's really important. And I guess the other piece of it is there's at least one more bite at the apple. So if folks are wanting to do some research and find out what it's going to cost and all of that, there's at least one more round of opportunity for amendment before this is all over with. It'd have to come through the committee process. So we'd have to get a legislator to submit the amendment for us, but fairly confident we could convince someone to do that should we decide that we wanted to either add in ODE as the investigator or remove ODE as the investigator. I'm seeing Adam and Jesus saying, kind of thinking we want to add it in and then pull it out later once we do the research. Not quite sure where we're at as a community here. Do we want to just go ahead and take the vote or not?
I'll make a motion to take the vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If anybody wants to
So
say.
as chair, Adam Rodakowski has moved that we take the vote. We've talked about, does anyone want to block that vote as a governor-appointed member of the council? Does anyone wish to stand aside other than Kati standing aside for conflict of interest reasons?
I'm going to stand aside.
Duly noted, Allison. Does anyone agree with reservations? Want to speak to those reservations?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with reservations, and I think it's because I want to understand more of it, but I want it in because like we were told, it's easier to take it out than to get it in later. So I'll agree with reservations for that reason.
Heard. Anyone else have reservations?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with the same reservation. I don't feel like I understand this well enough, but I do think we should put it in so that we can continue to address the potential issues.
This is Kyle. Same for me too. Please, thank you.
Gotcha.
Me too.
Okay.
Same for Ebony.
Same for Emily.
Same for Carissa.
Okay. Anyone else have reservations? Adam Peterson, are you raising your hand for reservations?
Yeah, I'm joining this team. I felt originally I'd be able to raise my hand to say, yes, I agree with this. But now that people have stated their reasons for reservations, I agree with those. And that would be where I'm at on this scale as well.
Okay. Dana Hiddle, are you also reservationing?
I am reservationing. Thanks, Anna.
And Robin Henderson, same. Okay, so this feels like such an incredibly tentative vote. Like almost raise your hand if you agree and you just want to agree with no reservations. Annette, do you mind taking your hand down? You had reservations, yes? Yeah. Okay, so folks who agree with no reservations: Sonia Little Deer Evans, Alicia Overstreet, April Flint Garner. We've never had a vote that was more reservations than just yes. Like, I don't even really know.
But, can I clarify? Because what I'm hearing, Anna, is that the people who have reservations are wanting to see a variety of different things. They want to see the fiscal. They want to understand this better. I don't hear anybody saying don't put it in the bill.
Okay.
I hear people saying put it in the bill because it's easier to take it out than it is to put it back in. And you can't get the fiscal without putting it in the bill.
I have some reservations that around putting it in, but more because I feel like there's this potential unintended impact that might make processes slower and make things not. I guess I think that there is a concern that schools investigating their own staff is a conflict of some sort, but when there's no abuse identified, don't employers do that all the time? And I just feel like some of this stuff would be handled normally. If it wasn't an abuse thing, it was just a performance issue, it would be handled
like through HR.
Employer. Yeah. And so when we're bringing in an outside entity to do this, I think that takes time, that it changes the dynamic. So I understand why people would want something like this, and I don't know.
That's your reservation.
Yeah.
Thanks,
yeah,
Sam.
that it will have an unintended impact, like a whole lot of things that have been put in place.
April.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just have to say that one of the things I'm sitting with is that the workload and the time that it takes when we investigate at DHS and it's not abuse, there is time and workload that's taken away from children who are experiencing abuse. And so DHS is carrying the workload of personnel investigations that I'm not saying we need to share the wealth, but I do think that having a space to think about what really is a personnel and a training issue that can be investigated by their own system versus DHS investigating everybody for everything, looking for a very small percentage of what ends up being child abuse. I really want to have that conversation as a state. Because I think sometimes we talk about, well, ODE doesn't have the capacity, but we're making the assumption that somebody does have the capacity to catch those incidents that are becoming a theme that really need to be addressed, that are not actually child abuse. And can we have ODHS really focusing on child abuse? Well, it gives me some comfort to think about other systems having some shared accountability around, or some consistency around, how we are addressing personnel issues across the state that are not yet, have not risen to the threshold of harm, but may be contributing to danger that we can all support. I think kids end up safer when we've got some consistency in our response. And so I want to just throw out there that there's workload somewhere. There's someone's capacity that's being impacted. What we do with that information once that investigation closes, if it is not child abuse at DHS, can we make sure that something is being done with it and it's being done consistently, and that those themes are being raised up so that we are all contributing to children being safer, even if it is founded for child abuse? That doesn't change the HR system of the place where the person worked. And I think there are opportunities for us to talk about in this council, regardless of what happens with this bill. How do we differentiate between what should be a personnel and HR issue, and when does it rise to a level of crossing a threshold that really the experts in child abuse should be really spending their time focusing on that and not being used as the HR system for the state. I apologize if I say that in a way that is offensive to anyone. It's just it feels like the CPS workers and the Otis workers and investigators are holding all of the workload for what should be focused on personnel and HR systems in many cases. I could be wrong.
Absolutely. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude. I'm going to pin it there because we're at section 5 of 30. We are way behind schedule, and I think we're just getting past some of the lighter work here. So I think we had a vote that folks approved some reservations. We will revisit this one specifically.
Okay, so instead of going through, I thought it was a good idea. We don't have time. We've already approved the amendments that come above. These are the new amendments that have come up in conversation or discussion that have not been discussed or approved or voted on by the council. These are at the very bottom of the document that you have. Does not have page numbers. I apologize, but it is the 13th page. If you can see when you're scrolling down on your own version of Word or whatever word processing software you use. So this section was, I believe, suggested in response to the critical incident safety review team of the death of a young man named Jacob in temporary lodging custody in July. I can't remember if it was July or August. And this young person was not consenting to care that clinicians and his guardian were confident was needed. After that time, a DOJ review was done, and it turns out that it is legal for guardians to consent to care for their young people if, in certain contexts, but that has been really unclear in a lot of spaces. And so this was actually a recommendation from the governor's behavioral health initiatives cabinet that we consider amending this language into the bill. So this language says, a parent or legal guardian could consent to inpatient behavioral health treatment for a minor that they have legal responsibility for if the admission decision is made by a neutral healthcare provider who has determined inpatient behavioral health treatment is medically necessary and in the minor's best interest, and the minor is regularly evaluated to determine if inpatient treatment remains necessary. This would authorize the the Oregon Department of Human Services and the Oregon Health Authority to create rules to implement this new statute. Discussion or questions on this recommended amendment? Emily?
Does this include youth over the age of 14?
Yes.
So if a youth disagrees, but their ODH's caseworker thinks they should go to inpatient, then this language would allow the caseworker's decision to trump the youth's.
And the parents, yes, as a parent.
I have concerns with that.
Alicia?
Okay, wait.
Further down, Amy.
Okay, I want to clarify that clarification there. From the question that Emily just asked. Okay, so if a state caseworker says that the youth should get in or should receive inpatient treatment, the youth can't say, no, I don't want this, and the parent can't say, no, I don't want this.
So it would be whoever is the legal guardian. So it would not necessarily be, if the child is in DHS custody, it could be DHS that says it, and then the parent who has lost guardianship would not have a say, just like they don't have a say in any other decisions DHS makes when they have guardianship. But it wouldn't be the caseworker that's deciding that. It would be like a medical director or a clinician who's deciding it.
Okay, so how does that go, or how does that impact the voluntary placement discussion that we've also had?
Say more.
So in terms of like voluntary placement, right? Like for parents, like we are being told, and I just recently saw another parent who was basically told that they have to relinquish their parental rights in order for their child to receive mental health supports. But the conversations that, or within those conversations that we had around voluntary placement, I was basically informed that parents don't have to relinquish their parental rights when we're doing, or when they're engaging in voluntary placement.
Okay, I understand what your question is now. Yeah, thank you. So I'm gonna call on, is Sarah Fox in the room? I saw her at one point.
I don't know.
Struggling to get off mute. I am here.
So
Hello.
Sarah, you're the voluntary DHS custody arrangement expert that I'm aware of that's in the room.
Well,
You may not
know.
feel like an expert, but you're the person I know that knows more about this than anyone else in the room. If someone else can answer this question, have at it. But Sarah, I'm wondering, when a parent voluntarily enters a custody agreement with DHS, would they be the one that would consent to this, or would DHS be the one that would consent to this under this policy change?
Yes, and I apologize. I am not, my video is not prepared at the moment, so I'm off camera, but I can confirm that voluntary cases opened with Department of Human Services Child Welfare, that the parent retains their legal guardian status, unless there is a different type of voluntary case agreement in which the parent voluntarily relinquishes their rights. That is not a requirement for voluntary support services, and that is just one of the case types. So no, there is no need for a legal guardian to relinquish their rights to receive voluntary supports through child welfare.
And then child welfare would not be the legal guardian, so they would not be able to consent a youth into care without the parent's permission.
Correct. Yes.
Alicia, does that answer your question?
That does answer my question. And then I want to make sure I clarify that this does not necessarily include the ABA language, right?
That's down below. We'll get to that.
Okay.
Robin.
I just wanted to be super, super clear. This is very narrow about when you have somebody who's identified as needing inpatient behavioral health treatment. So somebody who needs to be in an acute psychiatric facility in that very narrow space. Usually what happens in the adult system is they're brought to the emergency department, and a physician, and it's a two physician holds, and two physicians agree this person needs to be admitted for inpatient care because they're a danger to themselves or others. So this is extraordinarily narrow, extraordinarily small set of circumstances. Parents can't come to the ED and say, my kid needs inpatient behavioral health treatment. Will you please admit them right now? That's not a thing. Only the medical provider, the physician, can do that in the emergency department. It's only that particular very, 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 very small window. This goes back to what Emily was talking about, individuals over the age of 14. This is how this works for in the adult system. It is mirroring that system for children, so that when somebody is a danger to themselves or others, the path is clear for them to get emergency care. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Robin. Any other discussion or questions on this? Oh, Ebony.
Now, I don't want to add to the confusion. And I do know we're going to get to the ABA portion a little bit later. But, I know that the goal and the aim is to provide clarification, and here's where I don't know if I'm starting now to confuse myself, but from what I understand, I feel like this has always been the law, and we are clarifying. And so then my dumb question, I'm going to embarrass myself, is it confusion because we're trying to clarify also statute? Like there's
I can actually answer that question.
There's nothing new. So anyway, yes, I'll be quiet.
I just Kermit the Frog to you. I'm sorry. So yes, the reason this is actually current law in Oregon, but OHA and DHS did not draft the rule sets when this law was passed originally, and so there is no process for this. So what this would do would be create a mandate for rulemaking around what our current statutes say. It is not creating a civil commitment process for youth. That's a whole other conversation and separate discussion. It is just saying, hey, this law that exists, we don't have any rule sets for it. DHS and OHA, go make rule sets and make sure that that's clear. So it's more work for you, Ebony.
You.
But it's necessary to have to, I mean, we literally in part lost a Oregonian recently because this wasn't in place.
Any other discussion? I don't know, chairs. Do we wish to vote section by section?
I think that's probably the wisest.
Okay, well, that's the end of the first section. Does anyone wish to make a motion to either approve or not approve that section to be amended into the bill?
Just so I know, what that section was, what section?
It doesn't have a number yet. It's a new section that was proposed in response to the critical incident review. It's on page 13 of the document that was emailed to you. Well, if no one wishes to make a motion, we can.
Oh, I'll make a motion. That's fine. I'm sorry. I thought we were waiting in blocks. Sorry, I misunderstood. I'll make a motion.
Okay. Thanks. Motion received. Does anyone wish to block adding this section into the bill? Does anyone wish to stand aside? Who agrees with reservations? Please raise your Zoom hand.
If this is about section, I don't know. I'm gonna have reservations and I'm just confused and I'm not following along.
I can show, here, let me just pull it up again. It's this section here, the first section under new sections to add. On 13 of 15 if you're using Microsoft Word to read the document. And then it continues over to 14, but it's not this minor consent. It's just this parent or legal guardian to consent section. So I see Alicia Overstreet agrees with reservations. Kathy Mosley agrees with reservations, and Allison Stark agrees with reservations. Do any of you wish to speak to your reservations?
Yeah, I would just say that I understand that it's basically this is already in law, and that basically this is just to allow for rulemaking processes, right? Okay, so I would like to encourage us to ensure that there are protections around due process for young people. I understand this is not civil commitment or, you know, another version of civil commitment. I get that. And I would also like for us to make sure that youth still get some sort of due process in when it comes to them being placed in an inpatient treatment for emergency or based on emergency or for emergency treatment, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Right. So that at least like if we have somebody, if we have a child or a youth, you know, that there's some sort of like 72 hours, you know, after the 72 hours, you know, you get a check-in and all those things, right? That's what I'm referring to.
Okay. So you're kind of talking to like down the road, bill passes, you'd like to see these things included in the rules. Gotcha. Anyone else who agreed with reservations, which speak to those reservations?
I'm going to go back to the unintended consequences. It feels like making a really big decision with a very small amount of information, which I'm really struggling with. So if philosophically I might be in agreement, but I'm not sure how it would operationalize.
Yeah, and I mean that's exactly it, right? The rules they'd have to be a public rulemaking process. So like how it would operationalize would be like that's all we're doing is saying operationalize this. The how piece would be we'd need to engage down the road to kind of try to direct that if that were a concern. Okay, so we've got 3 folks who agreed with reservations. Emily, did you say you wanted to speak as well? Okay. So now if you are a governor appointed member and you wish to include this, please raise your Zoom hand and I will name out your names and then we'll move to the next topic. Okay, Adam Rodakowski votes yes. Sonia Little Deer Evans votes yes. Robin Henderson votes yes. Ebony Clark votes yes. Adam Peterson votes yes. Dana Hiddle votes yes. Kyle Johnson votes yes. Carissa Cousins votes yes. April Flint Gerner votes yes. Andrew Grover votes yes. Jesus Nunez Pineda votes yes. Annette Machikotami votes yes. Did I miss anyone who has his hand up? Sandra Santos also votes yes. Okay, so we will include that section in the legislative concept draft amendments that are coming out. Next section is at the top of page 14. This is another recommended amendment. I spelled consent wrong. Apologize. Describes minor consent rights without parental knowledge or consent for specific health care. So what this does is it clarifies to treatment providers on legal guardians' involvement when a minor has consented to their own treatment. Again, this is existing statute, but what it does is just make it more clear that when a young person consents to care without their parents' knowledge or involvement, the provider, if they identify that it's safe to do so, must involve the parent before the conclusion of that treatment. That's what that clarifies. It clarifies that a parent or guardian may not override the consent that a minor has given. So if a minor wants to engage in outpatient behavioral health services or other types of support services and their parent doesn't want them to, if they're 14 or older, a parent cannot override that. That's not clear in the law at this time. So this would make it clear in the law. And it clarifies that a parent or legal guardian may consent to diagnosis, treatment, or behavior analysis for a minor 14 years of age or older who refuses to consent. So this behavior analysis portion does contain ABA, and Amy, there is a section, I think, lower down. Oh, no, that's all that. This is the ABA section. Alicia Overstreet.
Okay, so I want to clarify 2 points here. And that the first one where it says describes, or the existing one describes minor consent rights without parental knowledge or consent for specific health care. That's the one where basically currently it says that a person providing treatment to a minor who consented to their own treatment shall have the parents or legal guardian of the minor involved, or it'll be changed to as soon as possible rather than before the end of treatment.
Correct.
Okay, so the as soon as possible piece is extremely vague to me because it does not necessarily mean that the parent is going to get involved or will be involved at all. Because a provider could just say that, well, it's not a good time to involve the parent in the treatment process, like at all, rather than.
I said as soon as possible before the conclusion of treatment. Like I thought it added as soon as possible, but didn't take out the before. Like so, it's trying to add urgency.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you, but on this one it says that the before the end of treatment is actually stricken out.
Oh, Michelle, can you answer that? what the actual words are? I don't have that up. Michelle is fact checking for us, Alicia.
Okay, thank you. If you want, I could move on to the next one while she fact checks that, unless you just want me to wait.
Yeah, go ahead and move on to the next one.
Okay, so then I am. Oh, and then the next one that I'm strongly going to present some opposition to is the language around ABA. Is that either the youth consenting to ABA without the parent's knowledge, and the language that says that basically a parent or legal guardian may consent to diagnosis, treatment, or behavior analysis as described in the following sections for a minor 14 years of age or older who refuses to give consent. So one of my strong oppositions to that one is the call out for behavior analysis, so ABA in this particular section, I'm just trying to figure out where that came from and like why that's being added here, especially when we're trying to figure out additional protections for youth, particularly when it comes to youth with disabilities and especially youth with IDD and ABA. I don't know how many times over the last 2 years I have been like preaching and saying, talking about the potential negative impact of ABA, particularly on kids with IDD or experiencing IDD. And here we are trying to, put it into law that parents can just override their children saying, no, I don't want this, I don't like this, which if I can also just mention that basically ABA or restraint and seclusion is a part of ABA. It might not be a specific widespread part of ABA, but I do want to point that out. Also, I guess pointing to the chat where family members are kind of, and I don't know if youth are chiming in on their experience or not, but families are chiming in on their experiences regarding ABA therapy for their youth and their families. So I guess just trying to figure out where that language is coming from. I don't mind the other language, it's just the ABA, period.
Thanks, Alicia. And I had forwarded that question to Ebony Clark. I'm not sure, Ebony, if you were able to find where that might, the only thing I know is that information came from the DOJ representative who works with OHA. But why they made that recommendation, I don't know. If it's Ebony or I saw April just turn her camera on. We got answers for Alicia?
And Chelsea, Jesse, help me get it right if I'm misinterpreting or missing some pieces. But from what I understood, our DOJ colleagues added this clarification because ABA per statute is a part of outpatient, and so it's a part of the statute. And I think that the ABA was just, if I'm tracking correctly, was called out at clarifying that ABA is a part of outpatient. Chelsea, did I get it right, or what would you add to that?
You did. It's making sure that we're referencing the parts above. So Alicia, on that section B where outpatient ABA is in ORS and part of the outpatient services. So this is just clarifying around refusal that it doesn't negate parental rights. And so parents can consent on behalf of their children. So it includes all of outpatient services, of which ABA is part of. So we're not adding ABA to anything. ABA is already there. It's outpatient. You're correct. It's already a service. This is just clarifying that minor consent law doesn't negate that parental right to consent on behalf.
Okay, so then why aren't we then just calling out all individual outpatient services? I think that is my issue with this particular piece here, is that if ABA is part of outpatient services, then that should just be put in the rules rather than into law. Like there should be. Okay, let me backtrack. If ABA is part of outpatient services, then outpatient services or treatment is all that should be in the law. If you want to add a clarification that ABA is part of outpatient services, then put that in the rule, but not in the law. If you want to add ABA as a clarification that ABA is part of outpatient services, then what we need to do is add in all types of outpatient services, including collaborative problem solving and CBT and all the other stuff. You see what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't make any sense to only call out ABA, particularly, over the last like 2 years of me being a council member, speaking on behalf of and with family members who, are experiencing IDD. It's very frustrating to come here and then see this, right? It's extremely frustrating.
So, Alicia, no, I'm not trying to offend or interrupt, but this is like a, public process, right? So like, this was a recommendation that was made. This is the, like, let's discuss it, right? Like I'm not just going to say we're never going to talk about ABA because we have some families who don't want us to support it, right? Like, this is not an endorsement of the SOCAC of ABA or not of ABA, right? This is just like, this was a recommendation, let's discuss it. So I'm sorry if you're frustrated that it got included, but like, this is entirely the point. Like, let's talk about it.
Oh yeah, and that's why I'm trying to talk about it, right? That's what I'm trying to do, is just say that I have been expressing this, and I know that OHA has been part of this process, and ODHS have been part of, the SOCAC and some of the conversations that we've on some of these issues. So that's why I think I was just saying, I was voicing that I was frustrated, because if this did come out of, a recommendation from OHA, it's like, well, OHA has been sitting on the council with us for, ever and a day, and they have heard my voice, and I have been, I am not the quietest of our bunch, and I recognize that. But there are certain hills that I have already determined I am willing to die on, and this is one of them. So I'm, but it's I wonder if we could, so I guess my solution to this, and I am willing to stand aside on this if we can take out the specific language around ABA.
So your recommendation is to change it to legal guardian may consent to diagnosis or outpatient treatment?
Yes.
I see other hands up, but what are people's thoughts or feelings about that?
What I will say is that, Alicia, I could receive what you're saying. And so what I will just say, to just be fully transparent, from what I understand, that this was something that was clarified by DOJ. So I was not a part of that conversation, discussion, or table when that clarification was made with DOJ. But I think just from a technical standpoint, ABA is a part of outpatient. In statute, ABA is called out separately. And so to me, from my perspective, I'm fine with just saying outpatient. And I just think too that the only thing that I have to do is I have to go back and do my due diligence with DOJ just to make sure that I can have a direct conversation with them to understand also directly. But at this point, you know, I say I tentatively support saying outpatient. I just need to close the loop with DOJ just to make sure that there's something that I'm not legally understanding or considering, if that makes sense.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
And I appreciate your voice and I appreciate this conversation. So thank you.
Adam?
Yeah, so Alicia, basically what I'm understanding is you don't want parents to be able to consent for kids to get ABA when the kid doesn't want it. Yeah?
No. That's not what I said. A parent can still consent to ABA treatment because ABA treatment is still, or ABA therapy is still outpatient treatment. I am just encouraging us to not necessarily put all of our hats in one basket when we're talking about outpatient treatment. So if you want to add ABA as a specific outpatient treatment or highlight it as a specific outpatient treatment, be my guest. However, then I would also like for other outpatient treatments to be added and highlight it in this process. That's all I'm trying to say, is that I just don't want us to to allow for all the eggs to be put in one basket and then only call out ABA when ABA technically still falls under outpatient treatment. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah. So section 1A of that, and the section we're at, right? It's page 111 of the bill. One little a is outpatient diagnosis or treatment of a mental or emotional disorder for chemical dependency, right? And so you're worried that one little b only says outpatient ABA. So you want us to amend the law that just says outpatient services and look at the ORS for that?
Which one are you talking about? Which is the chemical dependency one?
Sorry, so one little b has outpatient behavioral analysis, right? And so you're wanting that to just be all outpatient services, or you want us to remove b from the existing law? Because the ABA stuff is in law, like has been in existence. We're not adding that. Or am I lost?
No, I'm talking about 5.
Maybe we can share screens so we can be looking at the same section.
Sorry.
I feel like we're a little
you're
crossed up.
Yeah, I'm not sure where is it in this LC?
Under the same section, so the under
here, Joylene did it.
The section where it says it's 109 or ORS 109, right? And in that particular section, ORS or section whatever, I don't know what page number this is.
I got you. I found it. I just got to get it pulled back up right. And then it's in the middle of a page break. Hold, please. $112.
Right there, Anna, at the very top, number 5.
That one.
Yeah, so it's referring up to 1A and B.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you want to be removed from A and B? Because that's what it's referring to.
No. I am talking the first part of the sentence. A parent or legal guardian may consent to diagnosis, treatment, or behavioral analysis, right? So if behavior analysis is part of outpatient treatment, then all that should be required here is a parent or legal guardian may consent to diagnosis or outpatient treatment as described in section 1A and B of the section for a minor 14 years of age or older who refuses to give consent.
Right. So, but if you just do that, if you roll up to section 1A and B, it calls out outpatient ABA in one little B.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think she says she knows that, but like if the statute that we're creating says just outpatient treatment but doesn't explicitly name ABA, then where it references ABA, if that changes in the future, we don't also have to come back and change this as well. Like we're just sort of putting it out there that like they consent to treatment. ABA may be part of that treatment today. It may not always be part of that treatment. We don't need it twice in statute.
Right. That's all I'm saying. Because ABA or behavior analysis is outpatient treatment. That's what we've just established, right? With my question earlier, especially with what Chelsea and Ebony had just mentioned, is that ABA is outpatient treatment. So therefore, we don't need another clarification saying that you can consent to behavior analysis.
But
because if that's the case, then what we need to do, if the point or the reason for calling this out, or if the reason for calling out behavior analysis is to just say, well, you can consent to this, and this is part of outpatient treatment, then what we really need to do is list every particular type of outpatient treatment that's available. That's all I'm trying to say. Because what we're doing here in this, by adding this particular or behavior analysis, what you're creating is a separate, another type of treatment or paradigm or framework or whatever you want to call it that you can then bill for. But in reality, ABA is actually outpatient treatment. So therefore, you don't need that extra part where it says or behavior analysis. That's all I was trying to say.
I guess behavioral analysis, the field of behavioral analysis is wider than simply applied behavioral analysis. And so the term behavioral analysis isn't limiting to applied behavior analysis. It's a larger field. So like, I guess that's why I'm confused. And like, I mean, I see Jenny, you shaking your head at me like.
No, okay. So again, what I'm saying is that a parent or legal guardian may consent to diagnosis or outpatient treatment, right? As described in section 1A and 1B, which would encompass the outpatient applied behavior analysis as defined in ORS 676.800. So you don't need that extra or behavior analysis part in number 5. That's what I'm trying to say. You don't need that. If you do want to put that in there, then what I'm advocating for is that we add things like CPS, collaborative problem solving, as another type of outpatient treatment. That's all I'm trying to say, is that you cannot, like, if ABA is already part of outpatient treatment and it is already defined in 1B, then we don't need the separate declaration of behavior analysis. So all I'm saying is that like I'm okay with this entire thing, with this entire thing staying there, just changing the wording to may consent to diagnosis or outpatient treatment as described in section 1A and B.
I mean, I think we agree on this. I think we're speaking a little bit to different things. So I'm just going to stop.
I don't mean, I'm trying to figure out where am I not hearing you?
Maybe I can. I think I understand what Alicia's saying. I think I understand what Adam's saying. I believe that if we take the words behavioral analysis out of section 5, it still says fundamentally the same thing, and we're not doing another implicit endorsement of something that a lot of people are concerned about. that's, I think Alicia might be envisioning, this is just my own view, Alicia, correct me, might be envisioning a time where applied behavioral analysis is no longer in the outpatient kind of lexicon or whatever, and we don't want to have it buried somewhere else in statute. So that's, can somebody ask him? Okay. That's my view. Taking those two words out of section 5 doesn't seem to substantively change section 5, but it does address Alicia's concern. That's my own view.
Alicia, is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm mindful of time and that we still have a number of sections to get to. I think it might be time to entertain a motion from the floor. Or we can move on if no one wants
I
to.
will happily make a motion that we adopt this section with the removal of the term behavioral analysis from the third portion of that section as written there.
Michelle, you've got that? Okay. Clicking back over to our consent slide, is there anyone who wishes to block us from amending in that section minus the term behavior analysis? Is there anyone who wishes to stand aside from the vote? Is there anyone who agrees with reservations? Please raise your Zoom hand now. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat. Somebody says behavior analysis might better be replaced with assessment rather than just being deleted. That wasn't the motion. Emily, what are your reservations?
I put them in the chat. I'm happy to say it, but I'm mindful of time.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Adam? You don't want to speak to him? Got it. Okay. Those who wish to agree full-handedly, please raise your Zoom hand now so I can read them out. Voting yes on amending this section in with the suggested edits from Alicia Overstreet are Kati Mosley, Andrew Grover, April Flint Gerner, Robin Henderson, Alicia Overstreet, Carissa Cousins, Kyle Johnson, Ebony Clark, Sonia Little Deer Evans, Dana Hiddle, Sandra Santos, Annette Magicotami, and Jesus Nunez Pineda. Moving back to the next section, I am my tone is not because I'm impatient with you, but because it is 6 o'clock. So this next new section that was proposed, there's an existing statute that says healthcare providers can provide guidance of when disclosure of relevant health information about a minor's health to a guardian without the minor's consent is permissible. So there's already rules that say there are times when doctors or other healthcare providers may speak to a child's guardian about health information that they have not consented to disclosure about. This would change that, clarifying that disclosure about the information about the minor is prohibited under some federal law or any new federal law that would fall under that same statutory regular guidance, but maybe further amended or numbered at the federal level. This would replace an is with a may be regarding inpatient treatment to be making sure that healthcare providers are disclosing relevant information to minors, parents, and or legal guardians only when it's necessary. Michelle Pfeiffer, do you want to speak to the reason behind this amendment and what it would do?
That would probably be best done by OHJ folks.
Okay, this is another one that came from OHJ. OHJ folks, what does this mean? Also, Dana and Sandra, I'm ignoring your hands because I feel like they're legacy hands, but if I'm ignoring you and it's hurting your feelings, tell me.
Chelsea or Jesse, do y'all want to speak to this?
Yes, sorry, I sent you a text, Ebony. I don't know if you got it yet. This is because there were changes in what is called 42 CFR, which is the the federal rule around substance use records, and it is complicated and messy, but really all it is there was a small change in the federal rule, and so this is just to comply with the federal rule around substance use records for youth, and so it's just a tiny change to be compliant with that rule change.
Thanks,
And
Jesse.
so, and Jesse, and again, and we can, get information. So does this just mirror what the federal rule is, or is it just to be in compliance? Just the question.
Just to be in compliance, it just sort of makes it, I think the maybe just allows for the flexibility, which is what the federal rule requires.
Thank you.
Further discussion on this recommended amendment? Seeing none, does there anyone wish to make a motion for inclusion in the LC or not?
This is Emily. I move to include this new section in the LC.
Okay. Switching over to our voting slide. Does anyone wish to block this vote? Does anyone wish to stand aside? Does anyone have reservations? Please raise your hand. All right, all governor appointed SOCAC members, please raise your Zoom hand if you agree with including that section as drafted in as an amendment. Appreciate you all hanging in there. I know this meeting is starting to feel really long to me all of a sudden. It's because Michelle and I were working on this stuff until like 8:30 last night as well. So also shout out to Michelle Pfeiffer for hanging in there with us. Adam Rodakowski, Andrew Grover, Robin Henderson, Sonia Little Deer Evans, Carissa Cousins, Kyle Johnson, Alicia Overstreet. Oh, things are bouncing around. Sandra Santos, Kati Mosley, Ebony Clark, Dana Hiddle, Jesus Nunez Pineda, Judge Marisa Gates, April Flint Gerner, and Annette Magicodemy. Vote yes to include that section. That is enough to move forward. Thank you all. Please remove your Zoom hands unless you have something different you want to talk about, and we're going to move to the next section. This section would add requirements for schools to have video recording equipment for video in any rooms used by a public education program for involuntary seclusion of a student and any room used by an alternative education student as defined in ORS 339.256. This is a follow-up on a conversation we had with parents of children with IDD who were advocating for better oversight of restraints and seclusions in schools. There was another sort of alternative version which would add similar language to ORS 418.526 that would require Oregon Department of Education to adopt rules regarding the installation and use of video recording equipment in schools. Michelle, I'm not sure which is which, but I think the second option is the lower cost version.
Yes, and it would align with the current statute that exists for our child caring agencies.
So it would be all the same rules, which I love when we have the same rules for kids in different settings. But there are sometimes reasons why that's not the right idea. So, council discussion, what are your thoughts? I wish I could make this more visible.
I'm in do it mode. I move to include and get a fiscal so we can decide. So that's my motion.
Heard you, Emily. We do have to choose which version to include in this case. So we have two options. We have A, this would make it specific required for schools to add cameras in certain locations. And this would require ODE to make rules regarding video equipment in schools. So one is broader and cheaper, and one is more specific and more expensive. A is more specific and more expensive. Here, let me write this on here. So
My
that
motion is about A,
your motion is about A.
classic nonprofit lawyer, broader, more expensive.
A is more specific and more expensive. B is broader and less expensive.
I want more specific. I'm worried about seclusion.
Got it. So we
Yeah.
have a motion. Somebody else was just speaking.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I motion for A.
Okay.
And if we need to look at things in the future, that's fine. But as far as what's best for kids, to me, it makes sense for A.
Okay,
And
so we have a
and
motion on the floor to include, I'm sorry, we didn't really live with that text for very long. Adding requirements for schools to have video recording equipment in rooms used for involuntary seclusion and any rooms used by an alternative education student as defined in the education statute ORS 339.256. That is the
life
motion.
skill rooms.
Sorry, Emily?
So that includes life skill rooms. There's something in the chat.
That's what that definition includes, yeah. Does anyone wish to block this vote?
Does the fiscal, I think I know the answer, but I just want to clarify it. The fiscal that we're going to get back on these different things will be line items so that we can see how much this one will cost versus that one? Or are we going to get one big number? Because we already talked about one earlier, where ODE would have to investigate, school districts rather than school districts investigating themselves. We went ahead and said, let's do it because we want to know what it would cost and then make a determination. Now we're doing that again. I want to make sure we're going to have a line item fiscal because we won't. See what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally understand what you're saying.
This is Judge.
Who's talking? I'm sorry.
Judge Gates. My only concern with A is the last part that says life skill rooms, because I thought the purpose of this was to have eyes when they're doing discipline. Life skill rooms to me could be any room for alternative education, which I think is overly broad. So that's my hesitancy on the last part. I'm all for obviously an isolation type of discipline, but it seems broad enough to me. That's opening a door to say any room for alternative education, which is then why aren't you having cameras in regular classrooms? So, or maybe I'm thinking too widely. That's my concern.
Okay. I think it's a good concern to note. Is there other folks on the council who wish to discuss that concern with Judge Gates?
I'll just say briefly, Anna, I feel like that's kind of my concern with the second one, is it could be anywhere in the school. And so in terms of reviewing it, investigating it, it's going to be looking for a needle in a haystack. Versus A seems a little more specific. So that's why I move to include A.
Got you, Emily. So, and then there's some context in the chat that the definition in 339.256 of alternative education student is a student who is part of a school or separate class designed to serve their educational needs and interests. And I think that's clear to Judge. That feels in alignment with what Judge Gates mentioned, that sort of there's a broad application of who might be in that life skills room, depending on what kinds of educational supports are being provided to those young people.
Anna, this is Kati.
Oh, Kati.
A whole school can be a alternative program.
Yep.
So it would be in every classroom, every space of that school.
Possibly. I'm guessing there would have to be rulemaking regardless. Alicia, is your hand up for commentary on this topic?
No, I think you all have probably already addressed some of the things I was going to talk about. And I think I wonder if, well, yeah, I guess it would have to be rulemaking then. Just kidding. Scratch what I said. Any of my concerns I would have would probably have to be addressed in rulemaking.
Okay. So those discussions, please raise your hand if you wish to stand aside.
Anna, can I get an answer from somebody about my line item?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sort of I've gone brain
I
dead,
feel
Andrew.
like someone probably knows how these fiscals come back better than I do, and I don't
Tristan
want to
just put it in the chat.
Okay, well, can we just
Yeah,
get
so Tristan put the way fiscals work in agencies, they submit potential fiscals to the legislative fiscal office. So ultimately, it's up to legislative fiscal how they choose to publish what is submitted from the agency. Historically, what they do is an agency line item within the narrative that goes into detail how the fiscal was arrived at. Here's an example from the last session. So there's a link then. And that's why I was starting to say it's kind of a gray area because it really depends on who puts the document together as to whether we get a line item or not. In this case, we can probably push for a line item. Like, I mean, we can just ask that we get a line item and it's clear what each different cost is. And if it's not clear the first time, Michelle and I can pester until we get a clearer answer.
based on the
Michelle?
rationale behind some of the votes, I think that's what we would need.
Okay. So with that question answered, are we ready to vote to move into the agree with reservations portion of our voting process? Okay, who wishes to agree with reservations, please raise your Zoom hand so I can read your names out loud. Kati Mosley, Sandra Santos, Alicia Overstreet, Adam Rudakowski, Judge Marisa Gates, Andrew Grover, Carissa Cousins, April Flint Gerner, and Ebony Clark, and Dana Hiddle. And Kyle, I can't see if your hand is up because I have a thing on top of your screen, but you just moved. Is your hand up as well for agree with reservation?
Yes. Yeah.
Those are the folks, oh, Annette Magic go to me. Those are the folks who agree with reservations. Please put your Zoom hand down. And now if you're a governor appointed member and you agree freely, wholeheartedly, and with no reservations, please raise your Zoom hand. I've got Andrew Grover, Emily Cooper, Sonia Little Deer Evans, Robin Henderson, and Jesus Nunez Pineda agreeing with that amendment with no reservations.
I was with reservations. I didn't take it down fast enough. You named me in two of those,
Oh,
so that's okay.
Okay, Andrew Grover does not agree with no reservations. Please make sure that's clear in the notes, Corinna. Okay, going back to the next section. I think this is the last one. Oh, we've already had this conversation. This was the ODE investigating districts or not investigating districts. It was in there twice. And that's what happens when Anna Williams is working at 8:30 p.m. So we have completed the process on the suggested and changes. The other things that I wanted to go through are decisions that have already been made. Yes, there's nothing that is in here that we did not discuss on 12.3 and approve. No new changes have been made in this body. For folks, is there any other comments or discussion from the full council itself? I'm going to stop sharing. We will be working on whereas clauses in the legislative committee meeting tomorrow from 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning for this bill.
Do we have more public comment coming?
We do, but I
Okay,
just wanted to make sure that
yeah.
we had created space for any council comment before we hopped over.
I'll hold my thoughts because I want to make room for that.
Okay, well then let's move to public comment. Oh, I need to share the public comment slide again. And I don't remember if it's Annette or Adam who is.
I don't either, and I don't have it pulled up, but I can do it. If you've got if you've got public comment, feel free to raise your hand and get in the queue. And Alicia, you are up first.
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi, I'm Alicia Beamer. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer at Peace Health Sacred Heart Riverbend in Eugene. And first of all, I just really want to thank all of you. I look at the list of folks here and I see tremendous advocates for youth and adolescents, not only for their rights, but also their health, safety, and well-being. And so that's the space that I'm coming from today. And really, you know, as I looked at the bucket of work that you all are going through, and also just the conversation that you are, I just want to say how much I admire the thought that you all are putting in. And I also admire where these rules initially came from when they were initially presented, which was really to help with the, again, health, safety, and well-being of our youth and adolescents, and giving space now to be able to look back at those rules and see how they're being operationalized and how they are best serving our youth. And so I appreciate the opportunity to do that. Just briefly, my background is, just so you know where I'm coming from on this, I'm not in this space or an expert in outpatient residential or residential or community-based care for youth or adolescents, but I do have 10 years of experience investigating abuse and neglect for seniors, people and disabilities, and with mental illness, where I did apply the residential treatment facility rules while I was out in the field, and foster home rules. So I have some understanding on how those work and also how they're applied both by Oregon Health Authority on the investigative level and also on the response level. And I've been at Peace Health for 17 years, and primarily my role, because I'm so passionate about providing services to individuals who need behavioral health services. I've been involved in that realm throughout the time that I've been at Peace Health for the last 17 years, and I'm currently in administration. And so as I was looking at the legislative concept from that lens, I was really looking at two things from a hospital perspective that wanted to provide support for in the work that you all are doing, is that the lens of really, as we look at this, promoting timely disposition to appropriate care from emergency departments. And also, as the legislative concept talked about, Looking Glass, who's in Eugene, did talk about just even not having individuals come to the emergency department for care, because these rules will support them to be able to get the care they need in the most appropriate setting, which would be in the residential treatment facilities and those outpatient community settings. And so I'm looking at it from that lens. And really, as I look at the emergency department, there's a number of studies out there, happy to share them, although they don't really, they correlate, but you also need to kind of draw that correlation, mitigating the harm that our youth are experiencing from prolonged exposure to windowless emergency department rooms in chaotic emergency department environments. And this in Eugene, in Lane County, we operate 3 hospitals, 2 critical access, and 1 that's a trauma level 2 tertiary medical center. Really looking at extreme cases which can occur. Our youth are at boarding on average 3 to 5 days in our emergency departments, but there are extreme cases. Most recently, we experienced a youth who was boarding in a critical access hospital for 10 days, and another youth who boarded in one of our hospitals for 32 days. And I believe, in looking at these rules, that neither one of those adolescents would have stayed even half that time, or maybe even presented to the emergency department if these rules were in place. Just to give a high level, I want to make sure I'm respecting HIPAA, the recent example of an individual who was in our emergency department for a very long time. The reason why they came was because they exceeded the ability of the facility to care for them, and there was no other place for them to go except for the emergency department. And and I want to call out, I worked with the Oregon Health Authority, facilities, the county, the CCOs, the state. I mean, everybody who really was coming at it from a place of, we want to help and serve and get this young individual connected to the right service. But despite all of our work, we could not find this individual placement. And the key issue was the inability for the care facility to be able to administer intramuscular medication, and because in an emergency setting, which is very chaotic, there were times where we had to do that, despite it, very actually rare times. I'm very proud of our team, but despite even creative efforts like getting a child life specialist involved, occupational therapist, dietary, all of these different services, there is that need in the emergency department. So it was very difficult to demonstrate that this adolescent did not need that service, and to reassure the facility that they could be transferred there. And, I will just say personally, as an administrator, I've never felt as helpless as I felt in that time. And to not be able to get that youth to the right level of care, where they're sitting in our emergency department in a windowless room, and they cannot be a kid, that is the hardest thing I think I've ever had to go through in my job. And I'm not trying to make this about me, but that is how me as an administrator feels. Think about how that staff is also feeling, and the impact that that's having on our workforce as well. And most importantly, the impact that has on that kid. And as our psychiatrist had said, we're hurting that kid and not being able to help them despite everything we're trying to do, because they cannot get to the right place that they need to go. And so I really am advocating for, my background is oversight, quality, regulatory, risk management. I went through these rules for the first time, very detailed. I feel that there's a lot of oversight in there, and maybe opportunity for that even further. But that the rules are written in a way that would allow for that oversight. I would also encourage to look at, if you have a youth who is in a residential care facility who does require and has a psychiatric emergency and requires law enforcement and EMS to come to that house, there is that likelihood that they may be administering IM to that youth en route to the emergency department. But the rules that you have written here, as I interpret them, is that it takes a psychiatrist and a third-party oversight to look at that before that prescription can be written, and 24/7 nursing in order to give that. So that psychiatrist is looking at that use, weight, the different medications that they're on, and all of the potential risks that could be incurred while administering that medication in a safer environment in the facility, rather than a medication being given very quickly in an EMS environment and transported to the emergency department. So I do hope that the committee considers that as well. And as we move this forward, that really thinking about the safety, and you likely all have, I'm talking to the choir, but just from my perspective, in doing this a number of years, that would be something else I would implore you to look at. Anyways, I apologize for taking so much of your time, but I do really support and appreciate the work that you all are doing, and the work that happened previously to really focus on youth and adolescent safety. And if there's any questions that anybody has, feel free to reach out. I also do support the verbiage that was spoken about regarding Looking Glass, and the number of patients that have been transferred to our emergency departments because of that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure we were scheduled to end at 6:30. We're going to go longer because we took longer before the public comment. but I know that some people may have to run at 6:30. Amy, Jenny, I know you two know each other. Do either of you have to go at 6:30? Okay, I'm just making sure because I wanted to shift people around. Jenny, you're up next.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody here. This has been a tough conversation for me to be part of because I'm a disability justice advocate and the parent of a son who has been restrained and secluded hundreds of times in schools, in community settings, and also in an out-of-state behavior intervention placement. And so I just wanted to speak to a few things. For one, when kids are placed out of state, if I wouldn't have been able to fundraise and find money to go to the state where my son was placed, I would not have seen how they were abusing all of the kids in that program in the name of applied behavioral analysis. Which I did look up. The Behavior Analyst Certification Board does say that behavior analysts practice applied behavior analysis. So the behavior analysts that were practicing applied behavior analysis on my son were restraining and secluding kids, treating them horribly, abusing them all day, every day. And I would have never known that was happening to my own son. He probably would have ended up in an institution if I wouldn't have found a way to go there and witness what they were doing to him. But besides that, I just wanted to say that I appreciate all of the work everybody does in this, but I still feel very much like we are working downstream. And all of the things that we're dealing with, restraint and seclusion and abuse, those are things that happen downstream. And we really need to start focusing on the proper trainings and figuring out what it is that these kids need, because they need collaborative problem solving. They need sensory supports. They need real, true trauma-informed care. They need co-regulation from safe adults who can really relate with them. And so if we continue to try to solve problems downstream and do de-escalation and restraint, seclusion, all of these things, we're never going to get on top of the issue, which is that there's a bunch of kids telling us that the interventions that we have in place do not work for them. These kids that are repeat offenders that keep going back again and again to behavior modification programs and placements, they're telling us this does not work. And so I just wanted to bring that up and say that I hope we can continue to look at upstream answers to these problems so that we don't end up having to spend all of our time trying to figure out how to restrain and seclude and de-escalate children. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. When we're 51st in access to behavioral health care and second in rate of incarceration of young people per capita, I think that's a pretty clear line that we need to keep working upstream. Amy.
Okay. Sorry, getting back to my notes here. So I'm Amy Fellows. I am a parent of a child who experienced restraint and seclusion in the school setting. I'm concerned that this LC 346 seems to be a response to the lawsuits the state had from DRO and CASA regarding the foster system, yet I do not see the recommendations from the report of the special master reflected in the LC. I would love to be shown where they are, or if they are, or how those are being addressed. Understanding how you ensure individuals as well as the agencies are investigated and held accountable for abuse. Putting at the center of this, how do our kids get justice? The anecdotes in the safety work group and report and the OPB article that came out, I think on Friday, seem to be cherry-picked for the system's agenda and don't reflect the report the OHA paid NAMI Multnomah to do in 2022 on BIPOC youth's experiences, which I put in the chat, in residential settings, which I was part of the family focus group for that report to be created, and was heartbroken about the youth's comments that are in that report. Nor do they reflect any data on who gets restrained and secluded the most, which are Black, Brown, and disabled youth, as evidenced by ODE's restraint and seclusion data. Knowing these disparities, it was disturbing to watch the December 4th SOCAC, where this legislative concept was discussed in detail in a 4-hour meeting, which I've watched twice, and to have nobody on the SOCAC ask for your own racial impact analysis, I forget the name of it, to be done on an LC that clearly impacts Black, Brown, and disabled youth the most. I understand this now may happen with the DEI committee, and we'll be watching how that works. The anecdotes being used to promote this LC also don't reflect the 6 mothers I know that are involved in SOCAC work who have shared their lived experience with you and members of the SOCAC about their children's trauma from restraint and seclusion in a variety of settings, and it feels disingenuous. Have any of you on the SOCAC that are in the system seats had your own children restrained and secluded? How do we move upstream, like Jenny said, when more and more of Oregon's children are being thrown in the river? I am not hearing conversations in the SOCAC or other spaces at the state about how to support our terribly misunderstood neurodivergent children, especially in a way that creates felt safety and makes less escalations that require restraint and seclusion. The combination of strategies that work are adults understanding their own nervous systems and role as co-regulators. 2, having sensory safe environments and understanding how dysregulation from sensory challenges impacts especially neurodivergent and traumatized children. And 3, collaborative problem solving. I know bits and pieces of this are being done, but all 3 in combination are needed to make an impact and to help with the staffing issues this LC is trying to solve. I know this because this is the trifecta that many of us parents have made in our homes, and it works. It is how we are keeping our kids out of the traumatic settings that this LC is addressing. These approaches are much more effective for neurodivergent and traumatized youth than the behaviorist approaches used now in most settings. I'm going to skip my ABA rant because that got removed, but I do think it is important to know that Oregon spends $40 million a year through OHP, not counting private insurance, on ABA to compliance train autistic children to look neurotypical, and parents do not get true informed consent about the CPTSD caused by ABA. There are national experts that I can put you in touch with if you want to explore these strategies, such as Greg Santucci, occupational therapist, who we brought to Oregon last August for the Youth IDD Mental Health Summit, who is an expert on sensory safe environments. Dr. Lori DeSaltis of Revelations in Education is an expert on teaching teachers and other adults about their own nervous systems and how to be co-regulators for children instead of expecting children to know how to self-regulate without adult co-regulation. And I believe OHA already has contracts for training collaborative problem solving. I'm not sure if that has been shared with ODE or ODHS and other settings. I also want to say that Guy Stevens at the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint would also be a wonderful resource in looking at this LC. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. I appreciate you and your comments and words. Appreciate that. My understanding is we have Senator Gelser-Bluen on the phone, and she'd like to speak. Are you still there, Senator? We may have lost her. She may have fallen off. Any other comments for folks? Public comment. Going once, twice. Well, I think then that is the conclusion of our meeting. Heavy one today. Appreciate folks leaning in, having hard conversations, and you know, being willing to engage and chat this through. This is hard stuff, and we're all coming at this from the same position of wanting to do better for kids and families in Oregon. And so I think that as long as we continue to lead with that, we'll be successful in getting to the outcomes we want. And sorry, I see some, maybe that's
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've been trying. I didn't know that I had to push *6.
All good. I stalled long enough for you to get off mute.
Thank you. I was just going through hitting *1, *2, *3. Thank you. My name is Sarah Gelser-Bluen. I'm a state senator from Corvallis, and have appreciated the chance to listen for the last couple of hours and I've spent many hours on this LC over the last little bit, and there were just a couple of pieces that I wanted to clarify that may or may not be helpful. One was just a little piece, the last part that you all adopted on the cameras and the seclusion rooms. That, in terms of doing that fiscal, the law around seclusion and restraint for schools requires each seclusion room in the state to be identified. So we know exactly the number of rooms there are and exactly where they're at. So that should be a quantifiable thing to be able to track down. And it would probably be helpful if there are further changes to be made to clarify for schools that a room clear is not a seclusion or an involuntary seclusion, because that is a pretty significant area of confusion within districts. I heard Anna when she was kind of going through the process of what does this do, and there's been confusion and misunderstanding. I wanted to really name where, at least for me, the concern is and what I'm hearing from others in a couple of the areas. And the first one is a lot of confusion around the intent that the SOCAC has with this concept and restraint and seclusion. I really appreciate a much more clear definition, the serious physical injury, for what the threshold for the imposition of restraint or seclusion is. I think that is great for that threshold for imposition. What is confusing to me is that there now would be a list of prohibited restraints, which by any definition, as you read through them, are in and of themselves abusive. That's why they're prohibited. Prone restraints, supine restraints, restraining someone by the neck, grabbing them by the genitals. Because what wrongful restraint is defined as in Section 1, which is not in front of me because I'm in my car, is when there is serious physical injury, or there could be, or when someone uses excessive force. That's a very subjective term. So if you go back to look at what the screener has to decide, all of a sudden they have to decide with no information whether or not excessive force was used, which was the point of creating the list of what is it that is never allowed. And it started with schools, where there was confusion about, can you hold a kid's hand while you walk them down the hallway? Is that a restraint? That's not a restraint. But there were districts that thought that was the case. There were districts that thought if a kid is running out in the middle of a street in front of a car, you can't grab them to save them from being hit by the car. That's not what that was. And so what we did was got teachers, special educators, general educators, Disability Rights Oregon, trainers in restraint techniques to go through a whole series of things to name those things that are, one, really not consistent with training of credible programs, two, that are known to be dangerous, and three, that are just a bright line signal, this is not okay. The problem is that all of those things in that prohibited list won't be investigated anymore. And unless somebody, when they call the hotline, can somehow describe what that use of force is. I think there would be a lot more comfort if in Section 1, wrongful restraint included that full list of those prohibited restraints, so that anytime there is a mechanical restraint that's used, for instance, there is an investigation. Anytime there is a prone restraint that is used, there is an investigation. And that decision that the screener is making is they get information based on how that restraint was imposed. The way that it's written in Section 1, and I don't know if folks have had a chance to go and look at the first 3 quarters of reports from schools, or all the way back to 2021 for the restraint definitions for Senate Bill 710, but we can see exactly what's been substantiated for restraint. Almost all of those things, which were pretty severe, would not have even gotten open for an investigation if the definition of abuse or wrongful restraint is limited in the way that it is in Section 1. The other thing that is concerning is that if wrongful restraint and wrongful seclusion is taken out of the child in care definition in 418 and put into 419, that no longer is included in the quarterly reports of substantiated allegations of abuse, which is exactly how we are able to watch and see, are there things that are being substantiated that shouldn't? That transparency, that piece would go away. And more importantly, it makes it more difficult for kids to access those things. If we say it's licensing that's going to do it, we don't have civil penalties in licensing. At least I have never seen a civil penalty issued in the time that I've been working on this now, which is, 10 or 15 years. And those things don't automatically get sent to the kids or the kids' attorneys. It doesn't show up for the kids when they go back to get their records. And it takes away from them any avenue they might have for a wrongful restraint that didn't fit the new abuse definition to seek remedy to if that was the only recourse that they had. In the schools, if we're not investigating that, to do a restraint investigation through ODE, which currently there's a path to do that can take over a year. A family has to go through multiple steps before they can even get to ODE. And then ODE, all they can do is advise the district that they did it wrong. In the meantime, the child is continuing to go to that class and maybe be inappropriately restrained or secluded and watch other children be inappropriately restrained or secluded on an everyday basis. The other piece that I want to point out, two last pieces, and there's other things, but these are the key things for me. When it comes to the secure transport providers, there is a lot of confusion because the way that the bill is currently drafted, there is no secure transport provider that is left that is licensed because they get pulled out. Today, the medical transport providers, the folks that are authorized by OHA to do medically necessary secure transport, they have a whole process for how they can do restraint and how they can move someone involuntarily if it is medically necessary and an emergency. Those aren't the people that Senate Bill 710 was talking about. We came back and fixed that in the short session by exempting those providers they're not licensed, but they're certified by OHA. And that's important because all of the kids in foster care are Medicaid eligible. If you're Medicaid eligible and you have a medically necessary transportation need, you have to go through those OHA providers. So the providers that we're talking about are, three big guys that are going to come take a kid out of their bed in the middle of the night. They aren't licensed practitioners, and they can't take kids to a hospital, to a treatment program, to anything that is providing any sort of medical necessity. And yet we would give them more leeway to apply restraint than what's allowed through the Oregon Health Authority today for secure medically necessary transport, even for state hospital patients. So that is a really significant concern. The bill notwithstands language that was put in 2017 that prohibits the use of ankle chains and belly chains and ankle shackles to move kids between foster homes. And it's very concerning to see that kind of not withstood. Lots of concerns about out-of-state placements that I'm not going to mention because we'll have plenty of time to talk about that later. But the new one that is in there around allowing kids in care to be placed in adult programs that are licensed by APD or ODDS really freaked me out. When I worked at ODDS, I was brought into ODDS to work on finding where all of the kids were that were out of their family homes. And this was back in the early 2000s. We had close to 90 kids that were in nursing homes. Almost all of them had been placed there by child welfare. There was one that had been there for 26 years and had been forgotten about. We worked really hard to get those kids out of nursing homes. To have language that would allow kids in foster care to be placed into a memory care facility or an assisted living facility or an adult group home and not have the oversight and the notifications that are required within a child welfare system puts us inadvertently, I know that's not on the intention, but on the pathway back to something that was really, really hard and took years to get the supports wrapped around those kids in the community. That's part of where our medically involved children's waiver came from, was helping to move those kids out of these facilities. And, you know, one kid I would visit regularly, she was in a room behind a plexiglass door that was locked with a chain. It was Marquee at Mount Tabor. And I would go in, they would lock me in too. I worked for DHS, had access to all of her records. She had not been out of that room for over 3 months. And on her strengths and weaknesses form, her child welfare worker wrote, "This child has no strengths." We eventually got her out, and you know, she's out in the community doing all kinds of great things. But that is where the fear lies. I don't think it's the intention to roll those things back, but having definitions going back to the restraints that are prohibited restraints, but nobody that's investigating them, or just having licensing investigate them, that's what happened before. That's what happened before in schools, before DHS came 2 years ago and said, we need to add restraint in particular into the abuse statute so we can investigate it, because we're seeing dangerous things happen that we have to walk away from, and that's leaving kids in danger. So that's the rolling back of those things is concerning. I agree. I don't think that, you know, not filling out a paperwork, I don't think that should be abuse. I would agree. It probably makes more sense on, you know, if your certification is out of date on your training, it makes more sense to have a civil penalty set onto the provider and move that into a licensing place. That can be done in a much more surgical way than throwing that all out with that list of dangerous restraints that will suddenly create a much muddier, much more confusing picture of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So thank you for the chance to chat. I'm happy to talk with anyone about a lot of the things that are in this bill. It's big. It involves making changes to a lot of things that involved very large work groups that met for a really long time and fought over every single word. Some of those were my bills, some of them were not. And I think the last thing that I would point out, just as a tactical thing to think about, when you move into the language around parental consent and in this political climate, I just wonder where that conversation is going to go in terms of the amendments and minority reports that could get forwarded that would move us into things around abortion and trans rights. Not anything you're all going to do. It's just the recognition of that political environment and thinking about the scope of what a committee is being asked to do in a single bill. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. I appreciate that. That concludes our public comment for the evening. Thanks everybody for hanging till 6:50. Appreciate that. Wanted to make sure we had room for everybody to speak that spent the time that isn't a member that wanted to speak. So thank you all for coming. Next meeting, February 4th, the regular time, 12:30 to 4:30. Legislative committees tomorrow, DEI to do the GARE tool, which you were referring to, Amy, sorry. The next 2 months as well. So, all right, take care, everybody. Have a good night.